Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Council is convened for a series of work sessions, March 18th, 2026. I'd just like to make a few comments before we get started. We can go until 12 o'clock. I haven't set any time limits on anyone, so I'll just try to, as if there's active engagement, we'll continue to talk about things, but we need to but don't feel like we have to fill all of the time at the same time, but we want to get our questions answered and be informed. So welcome to all of the cities. We can all learn about TDRs here together this morning. And as this is a work session, we won't be making decisions, but it is my hope that we'll be able to provide some direction, at least as far as scheduling public hearing for the council to make their decision on the preferred alternatives so that we can move this process along. So with that, and I'm thinking that it probably would be good for folks to ask questions as we go along with your presentations. So we're going to start with an overview of transfer of development rights. We have Skip Swenson and Morgan Shook here to present. Are they in the room or are they online? I can't see it. Okay, good. Well, it's not on the screen up here.
Chair.
Yes.
Staff, our screens are not on this morning. You can get them going. That'd be great.
Yeah, we don't see anything up here. Oh, here we go.
I don't see anything up here
Okay.
either.
Morgan and Skip. Oh, I can see you now. All right. Take it away.
So is everyone able to hear me? This is the first time I'm using WebEx.
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'll get started. First, thanks to you for the invitation to be here. My name is Skip Swenson. I have a small firm that, amongst other land use programming and conservation and mitigation markets, I work on transfer development rights, and I have for the past 20 years, mostly in Washington, not exclusively. Within that, I've worked on local TDR program development and design and policy. I've worked on regional policy involving TDR into the regional growth strategy. And I've worked on state legislation and state policy, and have in the past and currently providing technical assistance to the state on this topic. So a fair amount of experience, and I'm happy to have this conversation, and I'll turn it over to Morgan.
Yeah, I'm Morgan Shook. I'm a director at Echo Northwest. I'm based out of our Seattle office, but have prior experience working with the county on a variety of different land use issues in the last 15 years. And like Skip, have a wealth of experience working in the TDR space specifically. I would say most of my depth of experience is really in the design of TDR programs with respect to the land use pieces and making sure that we can have adequate and well-functioning incentives that lead to uptake and use of the program, and meeting both its GMA goals of dual GMA goals of supporting our more urban places as well as land conservation. I'm happy to be here today.
Okay, and I can just give an extra plug for Morgan too. He's wonderfully brilliant at designing incentives and understanding the financial aspects of TDR. So we're lucky to have him here. So topic today for us is if you're thinking about developing a TDR program, what are the considerations that ought to be considered in putting that together? Design is the critical aspect of a TDR program. The ones that are designed well, there are examples of that have achieved their goals many times over. And then there's a lot of other examples where there was a lot of good intent, but design fell short, and consequently they didn't end up achieving their goals. And so that's what we're hoping to provide, is just a sense for some of those considerations. So if you'd please move to the next slide. So at the very top, I think everyone is probably familiar with this, but just to say that TDR, it's a tool from moving the potential development on one property to another, and creating the mechanisms and the markets that allow us to do that. Typically, these are going to be voluntary and market-based. They don't always have to be, but in Washington State, that's how we typically employ them. Next slide, please. At a very high level, starting at the left, how this mechanism works is on open space. Let's say a farm in this example. Within zoning and development regulations, there's the potential to build houses that right there aren't realized. And what TDR does is it takes that potential, turns it into a paper asset that can be bought and sold. It then creates the mechanisms from which it can move between owners. And then also on the right-hand side, in areas that are appropriate for growth or planned for growth, it creates opportunities and essentially then the incentive to purchase such that you can get more building space or more units. And we'll get into some of these incentive types later, but that's essentially how that works. The purchase and sale and then the market around it. Next slide, please. So a question I oftentimes get is, well, is TDR, we can see how it works in, big cities like Seattle and Bellevue, but, is it something that can work in my community? And the answer is really, TDR is possible, as I say here, if there is growth occurring for which, more capacity, building capacity is needed. And that's really the primary criterion for these programs. Some other essential functions or essential criteria as well are, for it to work, in addition to is demand for growth there, it also needs to have supportive regulation that's informed by market realities, the real estate market realities. And it also needs to have political support and political will to enforce those regulations such that the program can work. If there's ways to sort of skirt around it, like anything, most likely it will have low utilization. Next slide, please. And I should offer, if there's any questions as we get into the considerations piece, of course, let's just, we're happy to have the discussion as we go along. TDR is authorized in a few places in state law, but as relates to Clark County, the primary authorization falls within the Growth Management Act. And it has a few different listings, but essentially saying TDR is encouraged to reach various goals, particularly conservation goals tied to rural and resource lands as envisioned in the GMA. Grayed out below are a couple of other programs that are more focused on the Central Puget Sound and encouraging TDR in those places. But just noting that this is a tool that is broadly understood to be supported by the state. Next slide. They're presently from conservation-based TDR, and I should specify that's what we're talking about today. Transfer development rights can be used for any variety of applications, for housing, landmark preservation, in-city open space. In our context of sort of rural and resource land conservation, there are 29 programs presently on the books in Washington, some of which are not active, but they're still available. And you'll see from this map, a lot of that is in the I-5 corridor. And that makes sense if you think about that being where the population center is. And over the past 40 years, that's where much of the growth in the state has occurred. But it, of course, is not exclusively there. And so you'll see examples in Kittitas County, Clallam County, in some places that aren't necessarily, that Central Puget Sound region. But that presently is where most of the programs are. Next slide. And the last sort of warm-up bit here is just naming some terms that Morgan and I will be using that just so we're all have the same vernacular. There's different terms that you might hear for some of these, but for us, we're referring to sending sites as the land you want to conserve. Receiving sites are the lands which where development rights are transferred to and will be used in a development project. The allocation rate is a market mechanism that is used to define for any given piece of rural or resource land property how many development rights they actually have to sell from that property. As opposed to the exchange rate is a different market mechanism. They're related, but an exchange rate deals with and addresses disparities in value between sending sites and receiving sites. And that's important because if you want to create incentives that work, which is the next piece, it needs, again, to reflect the realities of the marketplace, the real estate market, construction as opposed to land costs, and exchange rates help address that and create functioning programs. And of course, incentives are the benefits that a purchaser, most likely a developer, will receive by the purchase and use of a TDR credit within a receiving project. So I guess I'll stop right there before we get into the considerations and just see, are there any sort of high level questions for this section that you may have before we dive into the real sort of nitty gritty of program design considerations?
Great, thank you. Are there any questions at this point? Yes, Councilor Luo.
Yeah. Hey, Skip. Just really, this is Matt Little. Really briefly, how would TDRs be used to encourage affordable housing or historic property preservation, for example?
Sure. So one use of TDR in an affordable housing setting would be through air rights. And so on an existing affordable housing project or I guess unit, that may be more valuable to a developer as another type, to knock that over and build something larger that's worth more, can generate more rents. What you can do to encourage the maintaining of that affordable housing is to assign air rights that can be bought and sold. And then when sold, the proceeds go into the maintenance of that existing affordable housing. So that's one example. Landmark preservation is oftentimes set up the same way. So landmark preservation, air rights, you sell the rights, it has to go back into landmark preservation, which is actually where TDR started. The first TDR program is actually a landmarks preservation program, and it spread in application from there.
Yeah, the way I think about and analogously, instead of the monetizing kind of conservation through allowing people to sell their development rights in rural areas, you're allowing those project specific, whether it's an affordable housing provider, historic property, allowing them to sell their excess capacity in order to sort of fund those specific uses.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Skip. And I can't see the other person's name, but a really quick question. When considering transfer of development rights, is there a minimum or maximum area size of land that can be transferred?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say in terms of transferred from, just to clarify your question, is that the idea?
Correct.
There's no minimum per se. I will say, and we'll get into this a little bit in the discussion, is narrowly defined sending areas, areas to be conserved, can have some, in certain cases, can have some challenges. One is this is a voluntary program. We're not compelling anybody to sell their rights. Constraining the market, if somebody's looking to buy, it may be that if it's really narrowly defined, there's nobody to sell, and therefore nothing is occurring. On the other hand, if you define it very narrowly, and for some reason someone fetches a very high price, again, this is sort of market-based, you can have price distortion relative to actual values. But, at the end of the day, this is really about willingness to pay and willingness to accept and negotiated purchases and sales. So it's not a bad thing. It's just a thing to be cognizant of.
Thank you.
Other questions? I'm interested in how the value of the sending site is determined. For some of the properties, they're zoned Ag 20. They may be divided into 5-acre lots at the same time. So does it depend on the zoning or the actual lot size, or what realistically can be developed? How is that value figured?
Or do you want to take this one?
Oh yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to use that as a good segue into talking about sending sites, and we can maybe package the
Okay.
answer as part of that.
Okay, that sounds fine. We can just continue on.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions before we jump in? Okay, so we have 3 major categories of design considerations. Program elements really is the heart of the remainder of our conversation. So if you jump to the next question, I'll just start first by making a note about goals. Next slide, please. So goals, this will seem really obvious, and this is written as sort of a starting point. So just to highlight, I'm not suggesting these are a good example of goals, but it may seem straightforward, but understanding specifically what it is you're trying to accomplish up front and what success means to you is highly important in developing a TDR program that delivers what you're hoping. So form really follows function with these, and it is very important. If you don't know up front, which oftentimes communities don't have the full breadth of specifically what they mean, to spend the time to really understand what this means. And if it involves community engagement and discussion and debate, I think that's a good thing in my mind in most cases. But regardless of how you get there, just having a clear articulation of what you're hoping to accomplish up front, very important. Next slide, please. In terms of another question we received was, well, how long do these take to design? Like from start to finish, how long does it take to make a TDR program? And it completely depends, as you can imagine, on the scale and scope of what you are intending. And so it is common for programs to take a year, 2 years, 2+ years from start to finish, start to adoption. But it really does depend on the circumstances and the objectives of your particular case. So it's hard to say, Clark County will take this long, but just typically, it's common 2 years plus start to finish. Next slide, please. Okay, so conservation and sending sites in particular. So sending sites can take a variety of forms. At their surface level, it's the lands you want to conserve. But there are a few more aspects of that are important to explore and arrive at choices around. And so I've just got some of them here. This is not complete, but it is, is it all sending sites of a certain type, or all potential sending sites within a geography, or is it some of those? And if so, why is that? Are these financially feasible for TDR? Again, this is sort of market-based. And an example here would be if you're trying to target exceptionally expensive properties, then that may not lend itself to a market-based tool where efficiencies become important for the buyers of these development rights. And I'll address your prior question. How do you price development rights? As I said before, it really is, at the end of the day, willingness to accept from a willing seller. What are they willing to accept for their development rights? How you oftentimes may get to that is through an appraisal. And so it's a similar kind of appraisal as a conservation easement, maybe. So it's looking for the highest and best use. It's looking at resource values. What are the disparities between the two? And that will, arrive at, it's looking at other properties. That will arrive at a conclusion. That's one way, and the most common way, particularly if you have public money, but just generally arriving at value. That said, it's going to differ from property to property based on its characteristics and its location, just like any other development consideration. And it's also going to differ between zones. So if you're in agricultural zoning, or if you're in rural residential zoning, it's going to have a different impact on values, just like it does for any development situation in a marketplace. The other kind of considerations you may have would be things like, are you looking for contiguous conservation, or at least is that your goal, or is it more just that we're trying to get as much, for example, farmland protection as we can? Does there need to be some sort of connection with where the development rights land? You have to connect with other conservation programs to make sure they complement one another. A variety of things. And the final, I guess, would be geographic versus criteria identification of lands. And I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like. If you go to the next slide, excuse me. This is an example of a community that opted to say, we're going to draw a circle around the lands that are important to us, and those are going to be our potential sending sites. And you can see them on a map. They're clearly identified. This is the city of Sammamish, and they said, for a certain direction out of our community, we'd like to limit development and start to add to the conservation, which is the green colors, the public conservation that we've already invested in. Next slide. An alternative approach to this would be more of a criteria-based approach. And this is from Kinnitas County, Washington. They were less concerned about, a specific area for conservation, aside from they're really interested in protecting and adding protections, I should say, to their working lands throughout the county. The limits they put on that were they want properties that not only are zoned for working for resource use, they're also of a certain size. You can demonstrate as an owner that you have resource income. So this isn't fallow property. This is property that's actually actively being used for agriculture or forestry. But they didn't want to have properties that really didn't have any threat of conversion to housing or other uses. So they didn't want, for example, industrial forest property off the grid, not on a private or a public road. So they wanted to have some kind of threat there. And that's really how they focused it. But again, they're not as concerned about a small area on the map and identifying the sending in there. And there's no right or wrong way, just kind of highlighting that there's multiple opportunities for how you design, the considerations you may want to have when thinking about how you achieve your conservation goals in this case. So that's what I prepared for sending. Anything else on that before we move on?
Well, maybe I could use this as a segue, Skip, to take the council member's question on how would somebody in a sending site value their development rights, and then talk about receiving areas. So I think the question was, and we'll get this here, the way that I think to think about how does the market mechanism of TDR work is to think about two sides of the equation. The buyer, so the person in a receiving area, which we'll talk about, they have to be able to say, hey, we have to find a way in the code or incentives to say, demand for them to go out and find a willing seller of development rights in your conservation areas to go and buy that. So we'll talk a little more about that. So the question is, what is it worth, right? It's only worth as much as somebody's willing to pay for it, ultimately, right, in terms of negotiating a contract. But if you're a property owner and you're a sending area site, and I think your example was, I can't remember what it was, but let's just say you were in a rural residential area and you had a house, but then you had entitlements for 5 more single family homes. And so the way you would think about the value of those potential development rights you could sell is what would a sort of developer pay you for just buying the land? And so typically we call this kind of, I think Skip referred to it as appraisal, but generally what they're looking at is what's the underlying value of the land for building something. So if you were to build a home, what could you sell it for? What would it cost to construct? and then what would somebody buy that land for in order to do it? And that would be kind of think the theoretical max of what that land is worth. And in that market assessment, you'd be thinking about lots of things, right? Well, is there enough demand, for somebody to actually, build that, right? And are there enough buyers of those homes to get there? And so you would think about sort of that price. And let's just say it's, um, 20,000 per lot, right? That would be kind of the way you would think about it. It's like, oh, well, I have 5 of these things, theoretically, it would be worth $20,000 per lot that somebody would buy that land for. And so I'm sitting on theoretically up to $100,000 worth of development rights that I could sell. In the end, right, you might want to discount that because, like, well, the demand isn't that strong, and so maybe it's, I have to kind of take a little bit of a discount on that theoretical max, and it's worth a little less. But then, if you're really I think motivated for conservation, let's just say, hey, I wasn't really planning on selling these anyways. I'd be willing to accept less than that theoretical max just to put the land into permanent conservation. And those are kind of sort of the more idiosyncratic things that you see happen between, holders of potential development rights, right? They may be taking just a strictly sort of market-based view on the value of their land, or they may bring other their personal sort of preferences for conservation and such in determining kind of the sale price. So I'll just pause a little bit before I get into the receiving side, but does that hopefully answer kind of the question? In the end, I think once markets get pretty fluid, people look at comparables like, oh, well, this person has a similar zoning and they sold it for this price. So that helps establish kind of at least a going price for this stuff. And then people can kind of negotiate from there. But in absence of kind of like, if you're kind of the first person in, that's how, as a property owner, you might think about the value of those rights.
Right, thank you. And just, it sounds like this is negotiation between an individual property owner and whoever it is that is interested in receiving more ability to develop.
Yeah, Skip, you might want to say more here, but there are a lot of different models, but at the heart, right, there is a strictly, hands-off kind of market-to-market participant. Buyers and sellers are, agreeing on prices, and the government role, right, is obviously in the recording of these things so that we can track the conservation easements as well as the transfer of the rights to different properties. But then there are other places where the governments can help facilitate it with information, clearinghouses to bring buyers and sellers together, provide information on sort of market sales and things of that nature. But I don't know, Skip, anything you want to add to sort of that context here?
We actually have a couple of slides on that
Okay.
a little later, so I'll just reserve for that. But we'll build on what Morgan just said when we get to that.
That sounds good. We have another question from Councillor Little.
Okay, yeah. When we get to that, I'd just like to know about other models of, like, say you set a credit at a value of $20,000, and then you assign certain properties and acreage a certain number of those credits, or 20,000, like increments of the 20,000. Just like to hear a little bit of the scenarios of that where you're predetermining the value of a credit.
Great. That's a pretty good segue to our next piece here. So the other side of the buyer-seller equation is the buyers, right? So we talked about the sending sites, right? You're trying to express your conservation policies in the land you're seeking to conserve. And then you have to sort of do a similar sort of development on the buyer side. Like, how can you get places to actually, developers, right, to create demand to buy these from willing sellers in your sending areas. And that area is typically called a receiving site, where you are specifically operationalizing within codes and incentives the places where people can access the buying of these development rights for some type of incentive. And so you're always trying to think about these sort of broader program perspectives, right? Is this the right area, right? This is the place where we're trying to incent higher intensity development through our growth management and land use comprehensive planning goals, right? Do we actually need, how do we think about that additional capacity you would get relative to sort of what the market is delivering anyways? Is the zoning compatible, right? Have we thought about sort of max densities, heights, and things of that nature? Is there, if you want to sort of actually express it, is there a political will to sort of change the zoning to allow people to do things and or offer different kinds of incentives to induce buyers to go out and buy these conservation development rights? And then how do we want to express that, right? Is it really kind of like a set of criteria, like every area could do it if it meets a certain set of rules, or do we want to be more geographically bound, right? Only these places. So for example, you could think of it as, hey, TDR is available anywhere, within these zones, right? And that zones is spread out. Or you could simply say, hey, it's only allowed in our downtown overlay area, and this is how we express it. So you can think about sort of as a receiving site program, right? You can think about the sort of nature of that, placing that additional density or incentives in those places. Let's go to the next slide. And so the things to be thinking about here are how cities do that. And so here's just an example of a kind of, call it geographic based policy that says, hey, we're going to use in the city of Sammamish TDR to help intensify development within our town center area. And so within the town center area, TDR is allowed within different kinds of zones, and they get different types of incentives depending on that. But think of it as basically a really place-based program and policy. We can contrast that with the next slide, where we look at Kittitas County. So this is a county level program that really specifies different criteria areas where they can be receiving areas. So obviously with anything within their UGAs, planned communities, including master plan resorts, planned unit developments, LAMRIDs, any approved rural zones within certain areas, or other kind of performance-based clusters. So think of these as like a set of criteria that allow you to say, hey, you can use TDR in these areas, and we'll show you kind of how that incentive kind of works within those places. So those are just kind of two ways to think about sort of the operation, how you operationalize that within your code. Let's go to the next slide. So
Morgan, I might just add two comments actually to that last piece. One is we sort of said either or with geographic and criteria, but there's a lot of programs that have both. They'll say these are the areas, thinking where we're working right now, Snohomish County. They've got very specific areas that say in these zones, here's the benefits you get. And then they have other things that say, like the Kittitas example, for rezones in unincorporated areas that are on their own merits authorized. An additional condition is that transfer development rights to use. You're not getting that, just getting that additional capacity, you're moving it from somewhere else. And so there's different ways of thinking about how you apply that.
Great. So here, I think a couple questions I would say on the most critical pieces of this, right? Without creating demand to buy these things, there's really no selling of development rights in your sending areas. And so think of this as kind of a two-step process in terms of how to think about this. First, successful programs have to have demand for building things. So like your TDR program will only work if people are building things. As part of that process, you have to understand what is the market want to deliver. Think of it as an unconstrained world of they would build 20 units, per acre, but our code is only at 10, right? Or like, hey, our code is at 10, but they're only building at 5. You have to understand that central question of kind of where's the market building at relative to where your codes and policies are. Because with that understanding, you have to design incentives that do either two things, depending on that condition. Either you have to find ways to basically allow incentives to have developers think of it as basically access more revenue by building bigger things, typically. Because there are economies of scale in the project, right? So this would be the example of our codes are at 10 units an acre, but like people really want to build at 20. Could we provide an opportunity to access that additional revenue by getting bigger? And so typically these are things like increased capacity, where you're getting more units per acre, more floor area ratio. If your codes work that way, more height, more lot coverage or square feet, whatever it may be. But think of it as basically you're trying to design incentives that allow things to get bigger. And if I'm a developer, I'm willing to pay a little bit of that to access that capacity. So I'm willing to go buy a development right because I can get, go from 10 units an acre to 20 units an acre. If you're in a situation where like, hey, our code is at 10 units an acre, but people are only really wanting to build at 5 units an acre, what you have to do then is think about things that are more cost offsets, right? Can we reduce requirements for parking or for public open space or things that you would be willing to sort of trade off, right? Waiving of certain fees. But in doing so, right, you created demand, right? Because you basically said, well, we have to design incentives here that are delivering at 5 units an acre. And so we have to carve off some of those obligations that we're willing to in order to create enough demand to go buy those development rights. And things that can operate in between these things are kind of access to programs, whether you're thinking it was like, well, maybe we'd be willing to use our MFTE program to help sort of underwrite some of this, right? In both either kind of a revenue enhancing perspective or a cost reduction perspective. Maybe we'd be willing to offer some sort of offset or reduction within our transportation impact fees or park impact fees. But those would be, I would think that these things are more novel arrangements. But generally what people are hoping to do, because you're trying to intensify development, you're really trying to operate in that first category of people wanting to access more revenue. Let's go to the next slide.
I have a question on this. How do you go about determining the demand that developers, or what the developers want? How have jurisdictions gone about that?
Yeah, so I would say they in some cases they don't do any of that, right? They're just, and I think some of our older programs, they're not calibrated to the marketplace. But when cities do this, they're typically doing some type of market study, and that market study, right, is sort of informed by data analytics, right? Trying to understand what's built. They're looking at sort of just the trends and prices and occupancy and vacancy, cost to construct, those types of things. And then they also do some of these kind of like project specific appraisals, right? Trying to understand the development economics of where the marketplace is. But then they also do a lot of outreach to interest in the development community. So developers themselves, people on the brokerage side, so that you can get the best level of information in the design of this. Because in the end, right, you're trying to, economy is always going to change one way or the other, but you're trying to lock in this idea that by either getting bigger, you can create demand depending on where it is. So to me, I think about this as whenever we design these things, we're trying to design them for kind of the next like existing or next business cycle. So when costs and revenues move in place, you created an incentive that folks are willing to buy, and so you have a project that performs that way. But yeah, so you're having to do a little bit of intelligence and outreach, I think is I would call it best practice in designing these types of incentives.
Thanks. We have another question. Councilor Little.
Yeah, this is Matt again. Can you describe a situation where you would use these TDRs or credits as a disincentive of requiring a credit to be purchased by a developer for a certain type of develop that you want to disincentivize?
I'm not sure I think of any design that people design that way intentionally. I think what happens sometimes in the miscalibration of this, right? One can think of the thing you're trying to achieve relative to the incentive being offered not being in balance, right? Because we want the incentive to be higher because it's voluntary to the access to the program, in this case, buying development rights. So you want kind of that sort of value to be of the incentive higher than what it costs to get there, so people voluntarily choose. What happens, right, when these things get out of whack is the cost to access the incentive is a lot higher than the actual value of the incentive itself. And so in that case, right, nobody would pay $1 for 50 cents, right? You really want a situation where it's 50 cents for $1. It's just a rough example of sort of the philosophy you're trying to impute in these programs.
Okay, I was just trying to think of the situation where a single family home would actually be the preferred thing for the developer, but the government, the the county may want to disincentivize that in a certain situation. And I
Yeah.
guess in that case, you'd say you'd be incentivizing the alternative to it.
Yeah, I would say what we see mostly there is just people just handle that just by straight zoning, what is allowed and what is not allowed. And you don't necessarily see TDR as a sort of modulator there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so this is just some simple examples here. Like on the left, you have the city of Snohomish. That's a very simple sort of program that says, great, by right, you can build something up that has 3 stories to it. And if you use TDR and go buy a development right, you can get an additional story on your structure. You then see more nuanced programs here, and what you see in the city of Sammamish is something that has different zones and they have different densities, and then you can get the additional density above that in terms of dwelling units per acre, but in a way that sort of mixes in different kinds of pieces. So on the far left, you see zone A. You see what the minimum sort of base zoning is there, the allocated density of that 16 dwelling units per gross acres. To access the next set of densities, one must use affordable housing incentives. And then at the very top, you can have participation in TDR to get you that last big chunk of density. And in zone B, you can see something that is, we call that typically kind of a cake situation. You're layering on different levels. What you see there on the left, in the middle in zone B, is something called kind of more of like the silo approach, where you're basically thinking it is some proration of things you have to do between affordable housing and TDR to get incrementally levels of additional density. And then on zone C there, you basically see, in some places here, we're just using straight dedication to TDR. And so this is kind of a way to think about sort of the design of your incentive structure is like, well, what is allowed in just by right, your kind of your base zoning, and then what is allowed up to a maximum, and what do you have to do to achieve that? And there's different ways you can structure that, right? Layering, silo, or just straight sort of dedication.
And one other point just on that is the way you design your incentive structure is also a way to help achieve your priorities within there. So this example here, there was a priority for housing, and so it becomes the sort of the first gate to go through before you can achieve the next level of height, which was TDR. And so they want to ensure that housing was used, as opposed to the middle zone. It was more of a mix, and they prioritized by the amount of units that could come in that were tied to housing, the amount of units that came in that were tied to TDR. So it gets into some sort of nuanced aspects of design, but that's just wanted to flag the policy priority of how you put these things together.
Great. Thanks, Skip. So the next question, I think maybe Councilmember Little, you had this question of like, how can we just sort of set a certain amount of development rights per area? And so we're going to talk a little bit about allocation rates. And we typically don't recommend these things because they kind of are, think of it as sort of a non-market modulator that tries to express a policy. Not that you can't do those, but you really would want to make sure you're setting your allocation and your exchange rates at the same time. And so what allocation rates are basically saying is they're trying to set a specific number of development rights that have to be consumed within a certain receiving area, right? And so typically this is, zoning or formula-based allocations, or they're based on gross acreage, right? Hey, for every 20,000 square feet we're going to use 1 TDR kind of thing, and you're trying to sort of basically set the price of this, right? And you can simply just do allocation rates. You can do them with exchange rates, but we typically just recommend that you just kind of go to the exchange rate, and I'll explain that kind of why here. Let's go to the next slide real quick. This will be a little clearer.
Yeah.
So in the allocation, go ahead.
I do think. Sorry, I think we should clarify. So you need to have some kind of allocation to say how many development rights are there. So there's a base amount, and that may be oftentimes based on zoning. But what Morgan was speaking to was if you have some kind of other formula, which he's going to get into, there can be implications to that. So just flagging that, Morgan. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no thanks. you do want to do the math and figure out, given how much development you are planning on accommodating in an area, what would be kind of the max or the amounts of development rights that you're trying to achieve, right? And what I'm trying to distinguish between here is like you really want to build this up from understanding kind of what the development wants, right? In terms of like what is the value of the thing and the incentive, and what are people willing to pay for that thing, and then figuring out what people might be willing to sell for it, as opposed to simply just saying, hey, we're gonna just say, hey, there are 20 development rights in this space, and we're gonna have to, and that's how people will sort of consume that, right? We can do it like pro rata. So I think what you have here is like, a zoning based allocation. You're saying like, hey, we have 100 acres. We're going to set up allocation of one dwelling unit per 20 acres, right? That means we got 5 development rights there, versus something that is happening outside of that, regardless of the zoning, where you're just simply saying, oh, we have 100 acres of development and we're going to allocate 20 of that. That means we're getting kind of 1 dwelling unit per acre. So if you go to the next slide, I think this will be a little clearer, is thinking about exchange rates. And so exchange rates are think of it as that is actually where you're doing your price setting. And I want just to say that in setting these things, one needs a lot of humility, because prices are very dynamic. The economy is very dynamic. And what you're trying to do is place a price in the code, in your land use code, which is sort of static. And this is kind of why you're trying to do this with great care and to hedge on the side of uncertainty in these cases. But exchange rates basically say, if I'm a developer, what do I have to do what can I get if I buy a development right? And so you want obviously all this to be consistent with your program goals. You want your market studies to inform all this piece, but this is the thing that you would hope, where you're saying, okay, Mr. Developer, we're going to give you access to $1 worth of benefits, and you have to, spend 50 cents to get there, right? Just as an example of kind of how the exchange rate works at its most core. And so let's go to the next slide. So the way to think about this, right, is you've got say somebody is doing the math on their development right, and they think their units are worth about 30,000 a credit. And so what you have to say is like, okay, well, if you're going to go buy that development right, we have to have something in excess of $30,000 to do that, because you don't want simply just to be 30,000 versus 30,000. Nobody's going to like do that deal. I'll give you $1 for $1, right? It has to be some sort of value to the kind of the incentive to basically increase the sort of, in the end, profitability of the project relative to what it costs to get there. And so this is the fundamental thing. And so we have 50,000 down here as just an example, but generally you're really trying to think about this in a way that is at some piece, right? Because, it's going to take some time to, go find a development right. There's going to be some transaction costs. So it's not simply just the 30,000 that the seller is going to get. There's some sort of cost of the transaction that you have to build in there, plus the incentive piece. So in a lot of cases, right, it kind of ends up being kind of in a like 2 to 1 kind of range, just because we want to make sure that we're providing enough sort of benefit in the design of these things. And so when we then create those exchange rates, we can operationalize them within the code by understanding this math. And so maybe that in the end becomes like a dwelling unit per thing. Like, oh, for every development right you can get an additional dwelling unit per acre, or 5 dwelling units per acre, depending on how the math and the code works. You would express it in kind of that way. A lot of places where there's more kind of in denser development, and you can do it for both residential and commercial, typically or mixed use projects, right? Where you typically would express it as maybe kind of an FAR. I get an additional FAR or additional square footage per development right. And so think of the commodity that you're trading in is really driven by the zoning and how the zoning is expressed, so that people kind of understand that basic math in setting the exchange rates. So I'm going to pause real quick and just take any quick questions on exchange rates before we kind of move into some of the program elements.
Counselor Little again.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how a developer would have know ahead of time how much this is going to cost him or her.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is kind of where I would say if you're starting from scratch, right, there is a learning curve and understanding kind of prices. And so I think what Skip had articulated in that sort of 2-year process, you're doing quite a bit of sort of stakeholder engagement and education in that process. Because one, they don't know exactly, a developer would be able to figure out like, well, what's my theoretical max I would be willing to pay for that additional dwelling unit? Like they can understand that math pretty quickly by just looking at their project and say, well, if the market really wants to deliver 20 units an acre, but I only get 10 by right, I know what I'm willing to pay on my project to get that additional 10 units an acre. Like that's a number they'll know. Think of it as like kind of their max reserve price. What will be challenging in the beginning, right, will be to go find sellers who would be willing to sell less than that reserve price, right, and trying to negotiate that. And so that's kind of the startup curve. And I think Skip will talk a little bit about places where how programs help kind of deal with some of that that startup and learning piece. But that's kind of the first challenge is really the discovery on the selling side, what people are potentially wanting to sell these things for.
Okay, thanks. And do staff help identify the landowners who may be willing to sell at that price, or is it a free-for-all?
Yeah, Skip, maybe that's a good segue into program design.
That is a good segue into the program, so I'll address that, Counselor. Just to note, a quick time check. Unfortunately, I have another obligation at the top of the hour, so I've got another 5 minutes. So I'll work through some of this to make sure I address your question. And then also, just to put a period, like a fine point at the end of Morgan's discussion on financials, that really highlights the importance of understanding the market in setting your exchange rates and identifying what the incentives are. If they are sort of, and oftentimes is the case, they'll just be sort of determined by policy with that in the absence of market information. And that's a common reason that programs don't function or they don't achieve their goals is they haven't put in the time to set appropriate incentives, exchange rates, understanding that those market dynamics. So just a few bits around what it takes to actually, what's involved in a program administratively versus staffing. And as I was saying before, it really depends on the scale and scope. So some programs have, 1.5 dedicated FTE, and then there's a lot of other departments that are involved. Others, split up function. It really depends on how large your program is and the aspects that you build into it. But I just listed out here some of the aspects that regardless need to be addressed. There needs to be general management. People need to field questions for landowners and buyers. There needs to be some kind of certification of development rights, making sure that they qualify for the program and creating the actual development right itself, recording that, tracking those, making sure it's understood who owns those when and when those have been extinguished. If you're a county that taxes development rights, and some do, some don't, working with the assessor and that team to value and tax development rights before they're extinguished. You may also then, as you were getting to, Counselor, you may be transacting development rights. Someone is going to have either an easement or deed restriction that they're managing, and sort of who's issuing, monitoring, enforcing those. So a lot of things to consider with staffing as you're moving forward. Next slide.
Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
real quick question related to the last slide. When you see staffing, there's a cost associated with that. Is there a method for cost recovery on the administration of the program?
Oftentimes, there'll be a fee for those that are wanting to participate in the right. So if a landowner comes in and says, "Hey, I'd like to participate," there's a fee tied to the investigation and the issuance, and there's some cost recovery in that way. That's the typical way that I see it.
Great, thank
If
you.
there's transactions, there may also be fees on that.
I have a question. Are there examples where there's a nonprofit land conservancy that runs the show that a minimal investment of time and energy by the government?
Sure. So that's a good segue to this section. So the answer is yes. It's absolutely possible for a nonprofit or another entity to manage portions of, and it could be large portions of the county's program. There will still have to be things that are managed by the county. So the recording and tracking of easements, the assessment, the aspects that are tied to certification. So there's some functions there, but things like community engagement, transactions, information sharing, that can all be conducted by an outside entity under contract or in partnership. There's different ways to think about it. With specific regard to transactions, this got to Councilor Little's comment earlier. There's ways for the county to say this is going to be between buyers and sellers. And so it's going to be negotiated transactions. Probably in that case, you'd still, as a county, would want to have some means for connecting buyers and sellers, because that can be a challenging aspect of it. As Morgan mentioned, there's transactional costs tied to that. But that could be, lists, creating a list that's in publicly available for developers coming in, willing sellers, that kind of thing. What I was just describing in terms of another entity managing aspects of it, that would be something more like a TDR bank. And that banks can be a government or a government agent buying and selling credits, and there's benefits to that, which unfortunately I don't have time to go through, but just noting that could be run by the county or that could be run by a private entity. So different ways of thinking about it. Also, these two are thinking more in terms of development rights, transactions before an application, before landing a development right in a development project. But there are times where it's appropriate to sort of reverse that and say developers can pay a set fee that then are collected, and then the conservation is conducted by the county or its agent on the back end. It'd be like an in lieu fee kind of application. And it doesn't have to be independent. You can have both. And there's just different reasons you may want to do that in your design. Next slide, please.
Skip, I want to respect
Yeah.
that you need to hop off this call. And Morgan, will
Yeah.
you be able to stick around a little bit longer?
Yeah, I can stick around a little longer.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll
Sure.
cover just two more slides here, and then unfortunately I'll have to depart. One is, I know you're talking about interlocal agreements today, and I just wanted to flag that most of these are negotiated, and there's some examples here at this link if you'd like to compare with those that you're considering presently. There's also something called the Commerce Rule, which is part of the Central Puget Sound TDR program, but it is kind of general TDR terms that everybody can adopt by reference. And so it's a shortcut to engaging, different jurisdictions within a TDR program. And there may be some lessons for you in there if you are interested in that. So I just wanted to flag that for you. And then the last comment I'll have is the next slide. And council staff asked if I would, mention, well, how do you plan for that within the context of GMA planning? And, that's a really large topic, but just 5 observations that may be of use to you as you're considering moving forward, just that I've seen. This is not legal advice, but just observations I've seen. As we say, TDR is authorized and encouraged under the Growth Management Act. You can identify it absolutely as a policy goal or policy direction in your comp plan. It's not necessarily that you have to have a program made before you adopt your comp plan, all else equal. Typically, TDR programs are going to support, both sides of your comp plan objectives, so rural conservation areas and your urban objectives. They're usually, if you're a city, less so for the county, but if you're a city, it's usually going to operate or going to apply within your established growth targets. So it isn't so much that you're planning for, 100 additional people, and then TDR gets you to 200 additional people, and that's outside of your planning. Oftentimes cities are going to incorporate TDR programs within what they're planning for. It's just one of the tools in addition to zoning and sub-area plans and everything else that gets you towards, managing for your growth target. And then finally, and this gets to that sort of criteria-based receiving site, but TDR may be, I will say, an additional condition to otherwise allowable land use actions. And so the example here would be, you don't necessarily know where a rezone will occur, but if a rezone comes in, a rezone request comes in, you evaluate it on your own terms. It is warranted on its own merit. An additional condition of that being approved is using TDR. So rather than just creating all the new development potential from that rezone, some of that at least needs to be transferred from somewhere else. And so these are common applications for TDR. Of course, there's more considerations under growth management, just a few that I thought may be germane. So with that, I apologize that I need to step out, but thank you very much again for the invitation. I'm happy to continue answering any questions offline that may come up, but best of luck with your discussions.
Great. Thank you very much, Skip.
Take care.
I'll go back to Councilor Little's question about the role for governments here and some of the price setting. So one of the things that we also see is counties or other governments basically be sellers in their own sort of role. So basically, outside of just the administration side of it, they may be choosing to sort of also participate in those rights, whether lands they have acquired through swaps or other negotiated deals, or through spending of their conservation futures dollars to acquire conservation properties. Right, they may actually own development rights themselves and can help support kind of the liquidity and price setting in the marketplace by selling their own rights. And so you probably the biggest example of this in the state is King County and their bank and how they sort of manage that as sort of a seller, but also trying to also kind of not interfere too much in the private marketplace. So those are just some other examples of sort of the roles that governments play, and also related to sort of help supporting kind of the liquidity and pricing in the marketplace.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about stakeholder involvement in setting up a program like this. Like, I envision that the county doesn't dictate what happens, that it is developed with the cities, with all the stakeholders, through lots of interaction. I'm just wondering what the process like that looks like, and which counties have had the most success.
Yeah, and the counties. So we're currently working in Snohomish County. We've worked in Kittitas, at kind of call it, and obviously up and down the Pierce, the Central Puget Sound pieces. I would say probably Kittitas is the most comparable in the sense that they kind of have a more closed system, right, where they're kind of looking just within the county, as opposed to Pierce, Snohomish, and King, which are all part of a regional program, and they allow depending buyers and sellers to kind of access different rights up and down those areas within their urban areas. And so I would say the engagement piece is really important, particularly in that case, because you're trying to involve a variety of other local governments, right, in their planning for both growth and conservation. But the nice thing about doing that is you can do it at scale, right, and understanding kind of, given the direction that all the communities are going, their needs for growth, the county's perspective on land conservation, you can have that conversation at the same time. That also is nice because then you can do the math a little bit with respect to, well, what areas are really going to be receiving areas? How much growth is really happening? What do we think is sort of the the sort of theoretical max or the sort of baseline absorption max for use of TDR, and then design your conservation and sending areas appropriately. And then you can also understand the county's role, right? Well, hey, well, at that same time, should the county be sort of providing some banking of that to help kind of the program get going with, access to certain pieces? Or will we basically then think of it as like, well, perhaps maybe instead of just buying them, we'd be willing to play a fee and lieu process, right, to help kind of just get things going, and then use those proceeds to go buy things. So you can deal with these sort of bigger questions around scale at a time that really makes the most sense. Because I think what happens sometimes, right, is you get a little piecemealing when you have kind of like, well, this city wants to do this and they're only wanting to conserve things within their UGA. That might be contra to kind of maybe the broader sort of comprehensive planning process that the county and the cities are in. So you can kind of see how, particularly in Clark County, right, wanting to do that at scale and at temporally at the same time will just help align a lot of your larger growth policies, but then also try to resolve some of the tensions that are likely to exist as you kind of work through that with your cities, as well as your developer and conservation stakeholders.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Young?
Yeah, so I have just kind of a general economic question for you on this. And my understanding, I mean, in order for somebody to pay or be willing to pay for the right to build, which is essentially what this is, there has to be some level of a scarcity. And my general question is, what exactly does that look like? I mean, what scarcity has to exist in order for this program to be successful? And what overall impact does that scarcity have on the county? And is it intentionally there, or is it a way, that we're at the same time trying to incentivize development, but we're also trying to fill that hole on the scarcity that exists? Just some general comments on that I'd appreciate.
Yeah, I don't know if I use the word scarcity, but I think I understand kind of the issue, right? You are trying to design codes and incentives in a way, right, that are um, um, leveraging existing demand, right, is the first part. If you basically say like, well, like you could think of it as basically a world where people want to build at 20 units an acre. Why don't you, or the market wants to build at 20 units an acre? Why wouldn't you just set the zone at 20 units an acre, right? And so for affordable housing programs or historic preservation or TDR, right, what they're all saying is, let's design a land use code, right, that we hopefully will not distort the decision making of people with respect to building things, and therefore, kind of, you think of it as basically creating a, think of it as basically, if you design an incentive system where people are trying to avoid it, you're creating a scarcity, right? Because you're kind of saying like, hey, you can't, you wanted people, willing buyers and sellers want to get together and do this thing and buy homes at 20 units an acre, but we're saying, you can't. But what you're trying to do in these programs is basically say, hey, can we help accomplish another public policy objective by leveraging kind of these investment decisions within the code, and hopefully design them in a way not to be distortionary? Because I think as we would say, right, if you flip that question around and said, hey, we'll let you give you $1 if you give us 50 cents kind of thing. But if you flipped it around and said, hey, why don't you give us why don't you give me $1 and I'll give you 50 cents? You've created that sort of scarcity because nobody's willing to do that. Like, well, I would do the thing if you could figure out the pricing correctly. And that's really at the heart of all these sort of design systems, whether we're talking TDR or affordable housing, is to try to make it non-distortionary with respect to sort of what the marketplace would do. And that really is a tricky thing as you design your codes and your incentives.
Another question from
Okay,
Councilor.
last one, I want to leave time for all the other folks who are going to speak, but we're going to be talking about interlocal agreements here. And as I understand it, the situation would be if the council here decides to de-designate any agriculture land, on its own merit. Full stop. Say that's the decision, and there's a certain number of acreage associated with that. What I'm understanding is that the cities are willing to go through some kind of agreement that would, in a future TDR program after the comp plan, that they'd be willing to buy a credit, so to speak, to protect farmland for that acreage before it gets annexed. Have you been able to review the latest interlocal agreement that was put forward, and is that a mechanism that could work legally?
I have not reviewed it, so I don't have, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't offer an opinion on that thing specifically. But I would say, right, de-designation would be something you would handle on its own merits, and I think that's correct. I think the question with respect to the TDR would be, do you want to set a policy around like uh, kind of a sort of a requirement, right, for the use of TDR based on whatever that number is, that you're trying to sort of, kind of, size your sending sites to, right? Like, yeah, nothing would stop you from doing that, implementing them thing, but like that would be, think of it as like basically a program design question, right? And it's not kind of a related to de-designation or mitigation. It's simply just saying, hey, for this city, we would like you to, participate in TDR to this extent, right? But I don't think that has any bearing on the designation. That's really just, I think of it as basically a policy and program design question for your TDR. Does that make sense? I think they kind of are traveling on two separate sort of like parallel universes, but they're really not touching.
Yep, I think that's how I envision it. I think that's how the cities are presenting it to us and the Planning Commission, but we'll be hearing more about it real soon.
Okay, I have a question following on that. If there is a block of land that is designated Ag 20, for example, that a city would like to bring in, well, there's multiple property owners there. So how does that, who is the negotiation with it? Is it with each of those individual property owners? The cities themselves don't own this property. How, that just seems awkward to me.
So if you're designating a certain set of areas as sending sites, right, what you're basically doing is some outreach, is just letting those property owners know that they have access to be able to sell these development rights if they so choose, right? There's no requirement that they have to sell. Typically, you're really just giving them this sort of additional opportunity that is in line with your TDR program's conservation goals. And so unless you're going out and actually buying development rights in certain areas, that's the only place where counties get involved in negotiation when, is if they're the actual sort of buyer of these development rights.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? One
Yeah,
more
Chair,
question?
one last question. Typically, anytime that you add cost to develop, it increases the price of housing. However, in this particular instance, it is increasing the cost, but it's also actually involved in the creation of additional units that otherwise wouldn't have been built. So is there a direct nexus from TDR on housing affordability in that sense? Does it have an impact? Has that been studied and is it understood, or is it not really known?
Well, I think part of it is understanding what your counterfactual is, right? And I think you define kind of like what is a world under the zoning that you can do without TDR and what can you do with TDR, right? And I think in that sort of way, right, you define the availability of just more housing being delivered and that's a good thing, right? Versus a world where you're kind of thinking it is basically like a tax, right? Where you're basically like taxing the project to do something. And I think both of those are really valid kind of perspectives that you need to bring to your design of your program, because you should take the housing affordability question seriously in this case. And this is kind of why the design of the exchange rates, whether you're thinking about it from a revenue enhancing or cost reduction perspective, are part of that that process of designing a well-functioning program, given the issues that are context specific to every community. So I think your question is one that is right, that should be brought to bear. And there's really kind of different ways to think about that. And given sort of what the importance is, you might design, a different kind of incentive system, right, relative to those conditions.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and last chance, any questions? Well, Morgan, thank you very much. This has been very helpful. If not, maybe a little confusing, but we'll
Yeah,
keep
you can go
working.
deep
We'll
on
keep working on it.
for those. But yes, happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to help the conversation along.
Great, thanks. So I would just suggest if people would like to take a 5-minute break before we launch into our next round. I think we still have plenty of time to cover everything. So we'll recess for 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to be continuing our work session. Our next topic is proposed ILA for a TDR program, what the cities want, how an ILA works, goals, proposed fit with comp plan, etc. So I will leave it to you all to, I have Matt Cole and Steve Stewart starting off.
Okay, great. Good morning, Council. Thank you for hosting this workshop today. We are thrilled to be able to have a chance to discuss transfer and development rights and how this plays into our respective comprehensive plan updates. Today is about confronting one of the most fundamental tensions of the land use planning process that we've gone through so far. And it really asks a question, I think, of all of us is, how do we accommodate growth while preserving what makes this place worth growing into? So, from the city's perspective, we've been working hard over the last 2 years now on our respective comprehensive plan efforts. The 3 cities that are here today are here because we have some specific areas that we've been discussing to be addressed. And I think the tool to do that has become through transfer development rights. The cities of Ridgefield, Camas, and La Center have recognized a moment of opportunity to create a solution that really works for everybody. Right now, we recognize 2 separate realities. First is that cities are being asked to plan for jobs, housing, growth, and the density that will inevitably come. And the county is being tasked with managing our collective growth throughout the whole county, namely the unincorporated areas. Both of us want to protect the agricultural lands of long-term commercial significance. That is not lost on us in Ridgefield at all. We really see the need to preserve key critical areas and also find ways that are characterized by growth and figure out how to best make those match with everyone's growth plans. So what are we hoping to get out of this workshop? Our goal is to establish a shared understanding of how TDRs can work. We heard a presentation on that earlier. We're going to hear more on it from Mr. Toyer and Mr. Stewart today. And we're going to facilitate, and those will be facilitated by an interlocal agreement that can allow us to accommodate growth while protecting the viable agricultural lands that we know that make this county great. So you've heard from us frequently on what our needs are. And the idea there is not to just to get rid of all of the agricultural lands for the sake of development, but really to find the middle ground of what is characterized by growth, how can we best meet that need, and then also how do we preserve the agricultural land that we see here. How do we get there? Well, we're going to get there by looking at some of the land use planning policies that are up there, but this is really far from a zero-sum math game. It has to be a strategic partnership between the county and the cities and how we get there and to align our vision for the next 20 years. What you're going to hear from all of these cities is that we have a vision for the way our city is going to grow out. We have been talking to our residents in Ridgefield over the past couple of years. We've heard a lot of input on them about what they want for the future of this city, and we want to make sure that we have a balanced approach to how we grow. I think that our city has done a fantastic job of growing smartly and making sure that we are careful in how we plan and where we grow into, but also seeing the need to, because we've hit our density targets, to expand into areas that would also be characterized by growth right now. So with that, is the question we're asking here is there a way to do both, to do that intentionally, how to be transparent through the process, and how to do that responsibly? That's the paramount decision we're up against today, and we're looking forward to the partnership and how we do that along with you.
Thank you for having us here. Is this mic on? Yeah, great. Thank you. Chair Marshall and council members Fuentes and Little and Young, thanks for having us here. We are anxious to start TDRs. In the last few years, 5 years to be exact, I've had a lot of requests from our community that TDR programs are set up. And I guess to analyze my performance, it was a swing and a miss on every one of them. There is no TDR program, but I'm looking forward to how we can work together to actually get TDRs set up so that we do meet the visions that our people in our community want to see, that there is some ag land, there is some balance on mega mansions, and there is a more balanced opportunity for people to live in our cities. And so I appreciated the people that were talking in the last hour or whatever, an hour and a half. And I learned a lot by listening to them. We have 160 acres that we're looking at, that we're trying to pull in. And we have a person that's willing to work with us on interlocal agreements that would be a start, a pathway to get to TDR programs. And so I think we've got a unique opportunity. You obviously are here investing your time in how to set this up and make it work. And we have subject matter experts all over the room here that could help us on that. And so thank you for your leadership, and looking forward to having transfer of development rights be something that's in Clark County as it was in King County, where I grew up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Hogan.
Thank you, Council. Appreciate being here. Want to thank you for taking the time to put this together. Our sentiments are we echo the same sentiments that Mayor Cole and Mayor Hogan has stated. We're excited to actually be on the verge of making some history here, maybe, right? The TDR is something that Clark County needs. This will preserve agricultural lands while at the same time growing responsible for cities. And a city of La Center is a very small city. We don't have the opportunity to build high rises in a town of 4,500 people. So we appreciate the time today to discuss this. We look forward to continuing to work collaboratively with Clark County to ensure the technical analysis supporting regional planning efforts is accurate, transparent, and consistent with both state requirements and local planning decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, members of the council. My name is David Toyer. I've got a land use and economic development consulting firm, Toyer Strategic Advisors. We are located up in the Everett area, so based here in Washington, but we actually work on projects all over the place. Washington State, Oregon, Idaho, did some stuff recently in Alaska. While we do a lot of our work for the private sector, we do public sector work, consulting with cities and ports and those sorts of things, especially on economic development concerns. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning to talk a little bit about, from a planning perspective, how you can go about marrying up these processes that are ongoing right now. You've got a comp plan update that is in process, which really presents a unique opportunity to put the foundation of a program in place, and then build from there. And so I'm going to cover a bit of that here. And then I've got Steve Stewart with me from City of Ridgefield, who can also talk a little bit about the interlocal agreement, and we can take your questions as we go forward. If you want to just skip a couple of slides there, since we've had everybody introduce ourselves, let's go to the next one. So as was mentioned by the prior speakers, and I won't belabor these items too much, but essentially there are 29 counties and cities that have some form of TDR programs here in Washington. The results that they've been able to achieve with those programs is over 150,000 acres conserved statewide. So it's a pretty significant contribution that's been made because of the adoption of TDR programs. Primarily, it's been used to protect agricultural, forest, and resource lands. And there's really been 3 sizes established, and that's representative of some of the examples that the prior speakers showed you, which is you've got local programs. Sammamish would be sort of one of those, is more localized program, although credits are purchased from outside the city. There's interlocal programs, which is multiple jurisdictions working together, typically through an interlocal agreement. That can be a county and one or more of its cities. And then there's the regional programs, which is really what's starting to occur up in the Puget Sound region between the counties and cities, which is getting multiple counties together. And that's kind of a unique place. It's why it's one of the only, it's the only place in the state of Washington that has these multi-county planning policies and those sorts of things, trying to force the region to work more collaboratively together. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of the programs. A few were mentioned earlier by the prior speakers, but one example is Whatcom County's program. They actually have 2 kind of elements to their program. One is the transfer of development rights. The other one is a density credits program. More recently, they've seemed to put more emphasis on the density credits program, which is that you can essentially buy more density, and then the jurisdiction is responsible for going out and acquiring development rights. But really, the framework for all of that starts both in their comprehensive plan policies as well as in their countywide planning policies. And so you've got to have, as was, I believe it was slide 10 of the last presenter's presentation, it talked about the timeline of how you go about adopting a TDR program. And that's not a quick process. And I recognize where you, and we'll talk about that, where you sit today in your comp plan update process. But the key to me is that there's this piece on theirs where it talks about establishing the goals and the scopes of the program and starting that process of the community outreach and the things that will come after that for the actual program creation. And so that first step can be done now. And the rest of it can be done as you go forward. And we'll talk about kind of the structure of a phased approach to this. Next slide. King County is another example, was also mentioned here earlier, to purchase the development rights from either the county's bank or specific sending sites. They do offer some in lieu fees for TDRs. But again, it's structured, all the programmatic elements of this are structured from both a combination of their comprehensive plan policies and their countywide planning policies. Kind of interestingly enough, there's over time, there's been some uniqueness in how King County has utilized that. One of the most common ways that it's utilized is that you can go up to 150% of the base density, for example, in some of the unincorporated areas. A few years ago, the county was getting pushback from unincorporated areas saying, you know, this is not consistent with our pre-GMA densities in our neighborhoods. So then they adopted additional policies to require additional steps that almost disincentivized the process. And one of those was they started requiring individual kind of sub-area studies per each utilization of a TDR credit. And so that now has been corrected by the county council in their most recent comp plan update. But these programs are fluid and dynamic, and there's ways in which they evolve over time. But at least fundamentally, they all kind of start in the same spot, which is the establishment of these both the comprehensive plan policies at the county level, as well as countywide planning policies and agreements between the jurisdictions, and kind of what are the shared goals, what are the objectives, and how will you accomplish that? King County also has a couple of other programs. or one other program of particular. It's a 4-to-1 program, and that is during like your annual docket cycle or during your periodic update, which is what you're going through right now. You can go ahead and choose to propose to bring lands into the UGA. You would get, for every acre, you've got 4 acres you're setting aside in conservation. And really that's targeted more specifically, whereas you've got your TDR program that's kind of countywide and looking at stuff that tends to be more targeted to the boundaries of UGAs, where it's been utilized in the past.
Can I ask you a question on this? Because I was interested in that 4-to-1 program. Is that just for rural lands, or is it for land designated as agriculture?
I mean, they've got a combination of both that are adjacent to their UGA. I've not specifically gone back and looked at individual proposals that have been approved to be able to accurately say, you know, what zoning each one of those was when it was brought into the UGA. So,
Okay, thanks.
we can certainly research that for you and
that
get you that information.
That would be really great, because I think that could be what is of interest to me is the ag study that was done and identifying of a whole lot of land that meets the criteria for agriculture, but was not zoned agriculture. So I think there's some potential to even perhaps increase the amount of agricultural land with a program like this.
Yeah, we can definitely do a little research on that and get you some information with like a follow-up memo to this presentation.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, next slide. Kitsap County was also, I think, mentioned by the prior speakers. They have a pretty traditional TDR program that's required for site-specific comprehensive plan amendments, rezones, and urban growth area expansions. So they are an example where they do tie it to those sorts of things. And so, you know, within certain designated areas, the TDR program can be used to achieve those outcomes. Next slide. Pierce County, again, more traditional transfer of development rights program. As was discussed a little bit in the prior speaker's presentation, I don't want to necessarily get into the same details. But again, my point in pointing out some of these program examples is the structure of it really starts with the creation of both some comprehensive plan policies and then some countywide planning policies that guide the jurisdictions in putting these programs together. Next slide, please. So just a little background of how we got here from my perspective, coming from the outside. Looking back, Clark County had some conversations about TDR use in the early 2000s. Really, the buyers and sellers question was seemed to be maybe the biggest hang up to the program's concept. And I think that's pretty much how it's been in most jurisdictions, is back in the early kind of years of the growth management being implemented. A lot of folks couldn't necessarily see how that was going to work, both either from a seller's side or from a side of utilizing it to get some sort of incentive. In the last 20 years, we've obviously seen growth in the number of counties and cities that have these workable transfer of development right programs and density and credit incentive programs. And then now you've been in this process of updating your comprehensive plan. And once again, you're discussing the potential for TDRs, what value it could have, and what kinds of goals it could help you achieve. And so now, my understanding is the Planning Commission's recommendation includes TDRs as a potential component. And so it's definitely worth having that discussion of how can you move that forward as a part of your existing process, recognizing that a TDR program creation in and of itself is a much longer process to implement. Next slide. So just kind of the framework for just, looking at this, when you look at the Growth Management Act, the counties are the ones that ultimately have responsibilities for establishing urban growth boundaries. Yet the Growth Management Act puts it to both the counties and the cities to work collaboratively and to have consultation on both UGAs, population allocations, and many other things when it comes to planning. And the periodic updates are really that point in time where that planning, consulting, and collaboration between cities and counties is super important, because that's when you're making your major revisions and you're kind of re-examining the next 20-year horizon. And so this is really the best opportunity for the county and the city to work together in enacting some policies that can support program creation. You do have a number of existing countywide planning policies, although not specific to transfer of development rights, are very focused on the ongoing coordination between the counties and the cities. And those countywide planning policies would definitely support an effort like this. So you've really got a foundation of existing policies that put this out there as kind of a valid thing to pursue as a part of one of these actions to periodically update your comprehensive plan. Next slide. So the opportunity that exists right now is that you've got some jurisdictions that have proposed urban growth boundary expansions. Those expansions could obviously be considered independently and on their own, separate from a discussion about TDRs. However, there is some stakeholder opportunities here to work with not only the cities, but the landowners to potentially create a program that recognizes that maybe this is an opportunity through proposed expansions to implement a TDR program that also results in preservation. So you're not just, you're looking at a UGA expansion kind of in isolation, but you're also looking at how can we get a benefit from that. And that's really what's being offered up at this point. TDR programs kind of become a mitigation measure for the UGA expansion to some extent, although I wouldn't necessarily say that it can become a mitigating measure that you address in your analysis of your final environmental impact statement. But it's really a bonus add-on here to what you're already looking at. I mean, you're studying the impacts, you're looking at ways that you're going to mitigate for those impacts in your DEIS and eventually in your final environmental impact statement. This really becomes a bonus add-on of what else can you do to go kind of above and beyond what you would otherwise do when looking at a UGA expansion. And the selection of a preferred alternative, which is the process that you're in right now, could definitely include the utilization of creating a TDR program as part of how do you achieve, the various different goals you're balancing in that preferred alternative, especially should that include the expansions to the urban growth boundaries. And I see there's a question.
Sure.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Toyer. Appreciate your information. I have a deep appreciation for TDR, especially after this presentation earlier today. It makes a lot of sense to me. Now, county staff is diligently working to complete the comprehensive plan by this summer. It was due about a year ago. You've mentioned a couple times that this is the only opportunity, the best opportunity to get TDRs, to start looking and considering TDRs. Do those opportunities do not exist after the comprehensive plan is completed?
I think you've got a unique opportunity here because you have
So there are other opportunities to do this after the comprehensive plan is completed?
Jurisdictions could look at a program at any time. There's no prohibition as far as when things could start. However, you've got a specific proposal. You've got opportunities right now that you could look at where you could capture market interest in order to be able to establish a program. That's one of the great challenges in being able to both establish and define the program, is being able to create those market opportunities where the value is seen between both buyers and sellers.
But I imagine we'd be able to capture those market interests in about 3 or 4 months once the comprehensive plan is completed, correct?
Well, right now is the opportunity, though, to be able to create the policies in the comprehensive plan that would support the program creation. You only look at your comprehensive plan once per year for setting policies. And, I'm not sure what you all are thinking as far as an approach goes, but some jurisdictions will often skip a couple of years after adoption of a periodic update before considering additional changes to either the text or, land use designations and things in their comprehensive plans. And so, right now is the opportunity where you can set forth the framework by which then you can start the program work after the comprehensive plan is adopted.
Thank you.
We'll note you did have completion of an agricultural land study. This really allows you during your final environmental impact statement process to evaluate all of the criteria associated with de-designation. However, I do want to note, and the prior presenters also noted that the question of de-designation is really a separate question from the TDR implementation. And so while they may be parallel and they may have some relationship, they're really kind of two independent things to take a look at. Next slide, please. So your milestones, you're more familiar with them than even I am, but you've been through a very lengthy process for your comprehensive plan update. And it's they've gotten more challenging over the years with all the new state requirements and things that Commerce asks for. But you've completed a substantial amount of your update work. You've got your draft environmental impact statement that's been released, public and agency comments that you've received. You've done additional studies like the agricultural study, and now you're in process with working to select a preferred alternative, finalize drafts for text amendments to your comprehensive plan, and then really draft out your plan, land use and zoning maps, as well as issue a final environmental impact statement. And so, right now you're not basically in describing where you're at. What I want to say is the door isn't closed for you to be able to look at the policies that would help support the implementation of a TDR program that would come really the bulk of the work after the comprehensive plan is adopted. And so next slide, please. Let's start kind of talking a little bit about this phased viewpoint or phased approach to how you could proceed. So right now you can utilize your periodic update to maximize the initiation of a TDR program. You can leverage this coordination opportunity with the cities to really expand resources. The cities are going through their comprehensive plan updates as well. They have staffs and consultants and things that are working on their comprehensive plan proposals. So there is an opportunity where, when you've got one person doing the work, it's the work of one person. When you bring multiple people together, as they say, you multiply what you're able to accomplish. And so you've got a unique opportunity here to leverage that coordination and work with the other jurisdictions. This is an opportunity to capture a market. And that is a market associated with a proposal to expand the UGAs. That's something you can independently look at and make a decision on as far as whether or not you are going to approve a UGA expansion. But this does present this unique opportunity to implement an additional program that has even broader potential policy considerations as far as what it can help you achieve as a county. And so, looking at this phased approach we'll talk about in the next few slides, this is an opportunity to not think that you have to adopt the entire program and have all of the details worked out, but that you can adopt the policy framework and work on an interlocal agreement with the jurisdictions that establish how you will move forward in the creation of that program after you've adopted your comprehensive plan. Next slide. So looking at this and trying to throw some concepts behind how would you tackle this as a jurisdiction, given where you're at in the planning process. I see this as being a sort of three-phased process. The first phase being the creation of the policy framework, which would be the preparation of some goals, objectives, and policies for the text of your comprehensive plan. The utilization of an interlocal agreement to establish framework for being able to move forward and have jurisdictional coordination on the creation of a TDR program, and then identify what would be potential receiving areas, which are these areas proposed for expansion into the UGA. And by identifying those and going through this process now, you're reserving that market opportunity pending the full program's adoption. And so again, stressing that this notion of whether or not you de-designate lands, that's one question. But the other question is that, the adoption of TDR program, but it's the identification of the opportunity now while it presents itself. And so you've got these various proposals that give you a chance to kind of reserve the market and hold it and capture that audience, so that as you go through the process, you've got a built-in audience that's going to have an interest in participating because they are definitely a market that has already been identified and available. And so that in my mind helps make this process move along a little bit easier, because you've very clearly established some part of the audience which would utilize the program. Sending areas would not necessarily have to be adopted now. I think that's, as covered by the prior presenters, a much longer discussion as far as what kinds of sending areas you would prioritize. And then the structure around how you would craft, those how that exchanges out into the benefits. And what we've seen over the years is that TDR programs have had to evolve as far as what their incentive offerings are, because just pure density is not necessarily a true incentive at this point anymore with programs. And a lot of that comes from the mandates that continue to come down from the state to jurisdictions, that you need to take additional density, you need to do more infill through implementation of middle housing measures. And so just density alone isn't necessarily an attractive incentive for getting folks to utilize these programs. Next slide, please. Phase 2 would be post comp plan adoption, and that would be to utilize the process that you've established via an interlocal agreement to start going through program creation, look at and evaluate traditional transfer of development rights programs, potential for purchase of development rights, and maybe even density credit program options. After the comp plan is adopted and you have this policy framework, that's really when you get into all of the details of that timeline that prior presenters put up there, where you're establishing, market conditions, market geography, or evaluating, how you would do exchanges, what those values would look like, what are the true, all of the potential incentives, and you'd be defining transaction models, who's responsible for administering programs and those sorts of things. That's a lot of work that has to occur, and a lot of that involves quite a bit of stakeholder outreach. And so that would be appropriate in a phase that comes after the comprehensive plan update to make sure you go through all of those processes. Next slide, please.
Question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back to phase 1. What is at its simplest the action that we would take to initiate a TDR program? Would it be simply a motion directing staff to set up the goals and set up the program? And then I have a follow-up question on specifics.
I think at its core, that's part of it. Yes, is the direction to create policy framework in the comp plan that would help establish, the basis for a TDR program and the collaboration of that with your jurisdictions. So yeah, that is a piece of it. I think the other piece of it is, the direction that you'll give as far as the creation of the preferred alternative and kind of how you put things in motion besides just adoption of the policy framework in the comprehensive plan.
Okay, and then for specifically, you could identify things such as there will be at minimum 1,000 acres of farmland identified as sending areas, for example, or tie with anything that is decided as de-designated, that acreage, say it was 10 acres, that there would be a development, a TDR associated with that through an ILA. You can get into that kind of detail right from the get-go.
Yeah, you could craft policies to have a certain level of detail, which, given kind of how this is envisioned to capture a specific market opportunity, that might be of value in this particular case. I think, much like the prior speakers, I would caution of getting too much into how specific you might try to make the policies. As for, them potentially then causing challenges with, what you learn as you go through the full process to do the market analysis, to do the stakeholder outreach. So
And-
I think, if you talk about the implementation of the program, kind of the purpose behind it, which is taking advantage of this opportunity, and then talking about some of the things that you would like to be able to achieve because you have a TDR program, which would be the preservation of certain types of lands and those sorts of things. And maybe you identify some land use designations or zones. I think that would be good. I think if you started to get into necessarily specific numbers or ratios of this amount of land to that amount of land, that might be kind of challenging until you've done that market analysis.
Okay. And then process-wise, involving stakeholders, we don't know who will be in these seats in the future or next year. So want to make sure that the process is set up right so that the cities and the stakeholders are at the table with us as we create it. And I suppose you could just say that in a motion to set up the program. How do you ensure stakeholder involvement?
Well, I mean, it's stakeholder involvement is really the key to the program being able to work, is to bring in, your two biggest elements of understanding the market is the sellers and buyers. And so that is obviously a major stakeholder component that has to be achieved. But beyond that, this is really a growth management policy, as growth management implementation. And you've got very specific requirements in growth management as far as the inclusion of public in the process and the opportunities for public engagement. And so if you look at the model that was provided by the prior presenters is kind of their methodology for how they would go about setting up one of these programs. I'm certain that if you were to direct a program to be created, you could specify that there needed to be stakeholder involvement from key groups, as well as the jurisdictions. But I think that some of the level of detail of that and how that would occur, you'd want to work with your planning staff or a consultant that you might bring in to help advise that process, to define exactly what that looks like, what would be the best methods of outreach, what would help you get the most response from those that would be in your target seller audience and your target buyer audience and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I think we were done. We're just wrapping up phase 2 there. So let's go to the phase 3 slide. And this would be, after you've gone through the process to create the program, the result is really implementing ordinances and zoning codes that effectuate how that program is actually going to be operated. You may need to come back at some point in the future and do additional comprehensive plan policy amendments. That could be also map amendments. Part of that would reflect where your sending and receiving sites are from a mapping perspective. But the additional policies, and what we've seen over the years is King County's added additional policies as their program has been refined. And so you have it on the spectrum. I mean, you have counties that have literally like one comprehensive plan policy that talks about TDRs. And then you have King County, which has multiple policies that talk about utilization of transfer development rights. And so somewhere on that spectrum, it's feeling comfortable with, after we've adopted this program now, is there additional refinement we want to make within the comprehensive plan? But that you don't have to get to that level of detail now. It's really establishing the framework to go forward. And then with full implementation, obviously, I think an important key to any new program being implemented is to establish monitoring going forward and setting some sort of a time frame for a level of periodic review so that you can make sure that, we've implemented this program. Is it working as we intended? Are there changes in the market that warrant that we make adjustments? And so you may put that to be concurrent with like the 5-year reviews that you will do under in growth management going forward, or you may pick some other sort of schedule associated with that. But I think it's always important when a jurisdiction adopts something of this substance that they do have some process to follow up in the future to make sure it's achieving the results that were intended.
Chair. Mr. Sawyer, I just want to go back to phase one. I was thinking about it. You mentioned that we don't have to get very specific about what the framework looks like. Is that correct? If we were to adopt the program before the completion of the comprehensive plan. However, in that phase one, we do have to include the de-designation process, correct?
That's already a conversation that you will be entertaining relative to the UGA expansion proposals, regardless of the TDR.
Okay.
So again, it's a separate matter. Yes, that is a part of your conversation going forward, but that is not.
It's not a requirement of the TDR.
It's not a requirement of
Got
the
it.
TDR.
Thank
Correct.
you.
So interlocal agreement, and I'll bring Steve in here a little bit to talk about this as well, since the cities have been working on this for a lot longer than I have been engaged. And I think it's important that you hear from your partners in that regard. But an interlocal agreement really is an essential component to any successful TDR program. Establishing the coordination between the jurisdictions, in this particular case, locking in a market opportunity to create a program, which may be a little bit unique compared to other interlocal agreements that have been done for the creation of TDR programs. So, reaching a level of specificity to the conditions that are kind of precedent in this particular case will be kind of a unique factor. But I think it's important that you have some agreement and framework going forward that really binds the jurisdictions together and how they go about the process and achieving the results. That's the linkage in my mind between the county adopting comprehensive plan policies that promote TDRs and then the work that the cities are doing at their jurisdictional level. Next slide, please. Obviously, I mentioned this earlier. This is kind of a unique opportunity with the jurisdictions in that you're all going through a comp plan update together. You're all expending a higher level of resources than you normally would on planning and engagement. And so now is really the opportunity to take advantage of all of those folks that are at the table in this process. And so I know in talking with the cities in advance of this, I mean, their staffs and their elected officials are more than willing to work towards the creation of this program. In this particular case, our firm has been brought in to assist the cities, and we're more than happy to also be working in concert with the county to help provide guidance as well as suggestions for policy language and any number of things that can help move forward that phase one approach. So, Steve, you want to talk a little bit about the interlocal?
Okay, I just want to do a time check. Would 10 minutes be sufficient? Because we still need to hear from the Ag Commission and the Planning Commission.
Dependent upon questions that are asked and the conversation around the table, certainly our portion of the interlocal itself, I think we can definitely do in the 10 minutes.
Great, thanks.
Of course. It was 12 instead of 10. Come on. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the council. Just by way of introduction, my name is Steve Stewart. I'm the city manager in the city of Ridgefield. Mr. Toyer is joining us at the table. We also do have our professional planners with us from all 3 jurisdictions in case there are any specific questions that you have. For my part, not only am I the city manager for the city of Ridgefield, but I've been practicing in land use law and policy for about 26 years in Washington State. As the state policy director for FutureWise, as the executive director for Friends of Clark County, as a Clark County commissioner, and now as a city manager. The last time this conversation of TDRs came up was when I was sitting on the other side of the dais as a county commissioner for the 2007 comp plan update. And when that conversation occurred, it did not result in a TDR program in Clark County. There was a lot of conversation about following up after that comp plan update with a TDR program. As you may see by the fact that we're still sitting here and none has been created, that conversation did not occur. This is a moment that has been in the making for many years. I will be going through the interlocal agreement that you have an updated draft of. There was an early draft just to kind of show how it might be able to be accomplished. That draft has been tightened up substantially through conversations that you have all had, that the Planning Commission at the county level has had, that your staff and certainly that our cities have had as well. It starts with recitals. The recitals are simply the shared work and goals. That is that shared understanding of what is it that you're trying to accomplish. And that was spoken to by previous speakers. It's also the authority, not only the authority for TDRs that exists in the Act in growth management as one innovative method that can be pursued, but also for interlocal agreements. And those interlocal agreements are something that we have a lot of experience with, both at the county and at the cities. One of the joys of being not only working as a city manager in a small shop, but being a bar certified attorney in Washington State is that I write a lot of our interlocal agreements and our development agreements. So we have a lot of good experience in this regard. The agreement itself starts with a purpose, and the purpose is to set up a program for transferring development rights from rural ag lands of long-term commercial significance to urban lands that are needed for jobs and affordable housing. It's as simple as that. Now there's more detail to it and more words, and those words and details are ones that in any contract you work out between the parties and you figure out what the shared needs are, how you get to them, how you get the language to accomplish that. The second section in the interlocal draft is the comp plan piece of it. And again, it's been raised multiple times. These are parallel processes that we are discussing. The interlocal agreement can be worked on now and be accomplished within the existing timelines for adoption of the comp plan and have that done. On a parallel track, the comp plan work, and Mr. Toyer spoke to that of not only the comp plan work that's already underway and the FEIS that you will bring forward, but how you can integrate those policies, those general policies and framework for a TDR program as part of that, and the de-designation conversation that prior to any real conversation of, all right, is there anything to talk about at all? Because are there lands that got brought in? First, you have to get to that de-designation conversation and make that determination as a council, de-designate or not. Because without de-designation, there is no inclusion in urban growth boundaries for land. It is only after you have that conversation about de-designation, then you talk about, is it appropriate to bring those lands into urban growth areas? And then we talk about that additional layer, that additional condition that was spoken to by previous speakers. So for this interlocal agreement, the agreement would state that the county agrees not to take action because we can't predetermine an outcome of the council, but the county council would agree to evaluate site-specific requests that were started by the county, requested by property owners, and included in the city visions and their preferred alternatives. Second, that evaluation would include all that legally necessary work, including the de-designation analysis in that FEIS, which is the appropriate form and format for that analysis, and it is what has occurred in the past. Third, if that evaluation shows appropriate to de-designate it, so if it is appropriate to de-designate those areas that the cities are requesting, then the county would agree to consider that inclusion, and after that, including it in the UGAs. The cities, for our part, we would agree to place an urban holding designation on any of those areas that were brought into those urban growth areas. What that does, it locks them up. It does not allow them to develop until conditions have been met. The conditions here would be that they would, number one, have to be annexed, and number two, they will have had to have completed a transaction for a purchase of development rights using a program established by the county that is set up in structure, in form, in this agreement. So that's the second piece. The third piece of the agreement is the TDR program development itself. What that states is that within 2 years of the effective date of the ILA, why 2 years? You've heard it from multiple experts. 2 years is about the outside envelope of setting a program. You can go 2+ years, depending on how you start it, but that's why 2 years. But within 2 years of the interlocal agreement being signed, that the county would adopt the comp plan and land use regulations to create a county-wide TDR program. Key, county-wide TDR program, not specific to these receiving sites, but really looking at something county-wide that you can establish sending sites geographically or function-based, criteria-based. All those different ideas can come from those stakeholders and really look broadly at that. It allows the time to include all stakeholders to develop the program with benefits beyond the ILA, with a market of receiving sites. And this is key, that you have a market of receiving sites that will be locked in place and time, set in urban holding, and only allowed and able to develop after they purchase. So you have buyers of density. And you heard it multiple times. Without buyers and sellers of density, the TDR programs don't work. They don't exist. The fourth part is protections. How do we protect ourselves? How do advocates for the preservation of those ag lands protect themselves? How does the county, and how do the cities? For the county, first, there's a section in the interlocal that if areas brought into the UGAs have not completed a purchase of development rights within 10 years, when the next comp plan update occurs, that then the county would consider, and again, we can't prejudge future action, that the county would consider removing from those UGAs those lands. You can do that under the law, and there's an RCW on point that allows the county to remove land from city UGAs. So there are provisions within that you have to make sure are met. The main thing on this is that they're not developed. Well, the way you know they're not developed is that they're locked in urban holding, so they can't be developed. So they would then be sitting there, and if you get to the next comp plan update, they haven't done the transaction, they haven't bought those development rights, then they can be considered for removal.
I
Yes,
have a
Chair.
quick question.
Of course.
Has it ever occurred that land has been removed from a UGA?
Within the state of Washington, yes. Yeah, there are examples in the state of Washington. In Clark County, I don't have any examples that I can bring to bear off the top of my mind. It's something I can look at. I'm not aware of any in Clark County. I know that there have been considerations. I know that it has occurred in other areas of the state. I'm not aware of anything in Clark County. So that's the first protection, is that if the transaction doesn't occur, if those people don't, if the owners don't buy the development rights, then then they are considered for removal, and that the cities, conversely, guarantee that if those lands are removed from those urban growth boundaries, that the density that is expected for jobs and housing are accommodated elsewhere within their existing UGAs, meaning that ultimately it would act as those expansions had never occurred. The only thing that would have occurred is a de-designation, and the de-designation, again, is a separate legal process, separate from any inclusion in a UGA. You do that based on whether it's appropriate or not under the WACs. The others, so now for the cities, what's the protection for the cities in this? Just some sideboards on the process itself and how long it would take, and so that there isn't some extended process to create a TDR program that doesn't allow for that market to work. So in the draft agreement, it states that if the county does not complete the work to create the program in the 2-year timeframe, then the cities would be able to annex those properties that we're speaking of and remove the urban holding. And that clock would not start during pendency of appeals. It would only start after any appeals had run, and then that 2-year timeframe would start. And again, these are all negotiating points on both the county and the city side as a starting point for conversation that we would seek to begin in our work with the county staff and certainly between our elected officials. That's the basic framework of the interlocal agreement in working in parallel to the work that Mr. Toyer spoke of in the comp plan.
Okay, thank you. I think a couple of quick questions, because in fairness, I'd like to get our commissions up here.
Yeah, just really quickly, what would be the timing of the agreement being signed in relation to a decision on the comp plan? What would be the best scenario?
So the interlocal agreement is the timing of creating it. There's obviously with any contractual agreement between our bodies, we have public responsibilities to make sure that the public's been heard on it. So there would be public hearings at the city level and at the county level for that to occur. As far as when they get signed, ultimately, which comes first, the chicken and the egg? The effective date of the ILA would only be after any action was taken to bring lands into the boundary. So it would make sense to do the interlocal agreement and have that. You could adopt that first because it wouldn't take effect unless the county council determined that accurately legally de-designated parcels were considered, then appropriately considered, and then brought into a UGA, and you adopt a final map and your final comp plan update. Only if that happened and those lands came in would the ILA take effect. Otherwise, there would be no ILA because there has to be consideration on both sides of any contract. So for the cities, that inclusion of that land in the boundaries would be the consideration, and then for the county, it's the other, it's the preservation that would occur. So ultimately, you could do the ILA first, and it still only takes effect after the comp plan is adopted.
Okay, yeah, I see the value in these parallel processes happening at the same time because, as you've said, both of you have said, if you don't do it and you wait till after, there isn't the incentive there. There isn't the trade-off of protecting farmland for those acres. They would basically be lost for their value in protecting farmland, even though they are a parallel process. So thank you.
One more question?
Sure. I have a question for David, and it's in regard to how frequently in the state do we see ILAs with TDRs between counties and cities? Is it more often that a single jurisdiction will do TDR program in their jurisdiction alone, or is it frequent that there's joint multiple jurisdictions?
I mean, it's growing in frequency that there are multiple jurisdictions. And so for example, what we've seen in King County is that it really was King County that was the primary driver of TDRs. And then, a couple of cities joined, and now multiple cities are a part of that. City of Seattle is a part of working with the county and utilizing TDR credits in the city of Seattle. So it's expanded over time. And so, they've done that via, the interlocal agreement in their case, which is there's kind of two interlocal agreements as I see here. The one that we're talking about today is the one that is establishing the program itself. Then there's the interlocal agreement that jurisdictions have done in the case of King County and cities, which is the actual, this is how the market and the transfers and who's got responsibilities for recording, all those kinds of things are spelled out in great detail. And so, yeah, I mean, there's to end up reaching this vision that's been shared to get to that point where you've kind of addressed all of these different points. I just don't see another effective way to do that between the jurisdictions other than to spell it out in an interlocal agreement.
Okay, and then upon annexation, the county loses control over that land. So essentially, the county alone could not implement or involve that land in any TDR program. Is that accurate?
I'm going to let Steve jump into that portion of it.
Yeah. So traditional programs, the interlocals that are created between the cities and the counties, Yes, you have to have both the cities and the county in, because in most traditional programs where you're adding density, where a city will allow additional density to be built within their jurisdictions, they have to take that action through their development regulations, their comp plan. They have to allow that density change or a zone change to occur. And so, yes, the cities have sole responsibility within their annexed boundaries for that. So that's why they have interlocals with the county, because then King County says, well, we have these sending sites of land we want to preserve. The cities say, okay, well, yeah, we'll participate in this TDR program with you. We'll allow that additional density and then send that value to the unincorporated county. What you've seen more recently, though, they've amended those interlocal agreements where the cities are now saying, we'll send some of that value of the increased density to that protection in those rural areas. However, the King County TDR program is sending some of that value back to the cities for affordable housing. Because as Mr. Toyer indicated, there are a lot of state requirements now for us all to accomplish and accommodate more density without selling it, but with giving it away in our zoning. So they've had to adapt, the interlocals and their agreements that way. So yes, there is a role for both.
Okay, and so my question is primarily centered around if land were to be de-designated in the process of the comp plan, it enters the urban growth area, a city annexes it. At that point, we have without correlation and agreement in ILA with the city, we do not have the ability to include that land in a TDR program.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have to pause. Thank you both very much. Stick around. We might still have some time at the end if there's additional questions, but I'd like to call up the Planning Commission representatives. And then I guess, let's bring the Ag Commission. Let's bring both commissions up. Thank you all. You can sit up here. I think there'll be room for you.
Chair,
Yes,
this is Chris Cook.
thank you.
And I just wanted to point out that, excuse me, the Planning Commission did not vote to send representatives to this meeting to speak on behalf of the commission. So this is not the Planning Commission representatives coming up. These are individual planning commissioners, and they will not be saying something that's like, this is the sense of the Planning Commission. They're not authorized to do that.
Thank you for that clarification. And I would also indicate that the Ag Commission did discuss this and they have agreed on whatever statement they're going to be providing. So thanks for that clarification. And I believe the planning commissioners were about to say that as well. So please go ahead, Jack, if you want to, whoever wants to start.
My name is Jack Haroon, member of the Planning Commission, current vice chair. As far as what would you like us to talk about, the TDRs, what was the, because there were some, I know there were some questions on the last thing as far as what
you were recommending, and I guess from your individual perspective, because having listened to that meeting, it sounded like there were different perspectives, but kind of everything hung on TDRs as a broad agreement, but I think there were different interpretations of what that meant. So I think all maybe you can do is talk about it from your perspective.
Yeah, well, I think the as far as, so I'll kind of go broad strokes. There's the TDR conversation, and then there was site specific things that we spoke about on recommendations of what should be adopted in or not, and some understandings on that. So
Sure. In addition to that, I'd love to hear just clarifications on the motion. I think, Ron, you made the motion, just clarifications on what was meant on the ILA TDR motion. And then I do, at the end, if we do have time, I do have questions about the decisions on battleground area, just what that was, because I think we'll hear something different from the city, and just wanted to get some clarity on that if there's time.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some important conversations to have on that. The Camas area, there's a lot to unpack there. But as far as TDRs, my understanding of a TDR was a very clean TDR program, meaning we have ag in one portion, we want to preserve ag in another portion, and then that is kind of the basic transfer of information or of preservation. As you really look at what's possible with this is used as a conservation tool, it's actually pretty exciting to me. I looked at it from a like how do we permanently create and enhance existing lands, and that could even be, I mean, it's limitless as far as purchasing of water rights to enhance dry lands as ag, and I think there's just a lot of opportunities there. I didn't agree with the presentation that was given to us, the King County approach, where they used it as like density bonuses. It's like, we'll sell you rights if you do this kind of thing. Just as an affordable housing advocate, I like the city of Vancouver's current approach, where we have no density bonuses. Their whole new code is like there's no actually maximum density. They want as much density as you possibly can put on there, and they're not going to penalize you for doing that. So I look at the TDR program more as a preservation tool and an enhancement tool for our future generations, where we're taking some land here, and maybe the Columbia Land Trust gets a large grant and then has a really nice comprehensive program, and then we're buying credits from them, from we being developer community. But I mean, we have 2 years of conversation there, I think, of how that would look. But that would be kind of my.
What would be the incentive for a developer to participate?
Oh, easy. So if you have like City of Ridgefield, right? They have a section of land they want to take in. That from a developer standpoint, that land is dead land until you have the ability to develop it. So say they brought in 100 acres, I buy 10 acres. Well, I just still own 10 acres that I can't do anything with except maybe hay, right? And so I have a profound incentive to go out and find development rights, so I then can develop my 10 acres of land. So maybe it's purchasing 20 acres of development, or of ag land, ish, or development rights of ag land, however that works. So then it allows me to do that. So the market is very much built in because we have a limited land supply. And if you talk to any developer, they're going to tell you, I mean, that's why this has been such a big deal, is we don't have the land to develop cost efficiently. Yeah, does that answer your question?
So it'd just be the ability to have land to build on, and you would pay for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's not worth anything to a developer standpoint until you're allowed to develop. So you're basically you own the land, but you're now purchasing development rights to that land through the TDR program. So I have 10 acres of ag land, or what used to be ag land, but now it's unzoned. But there's an overlay on it. There's a cloud call it on the title, until I then go out and purchase credits that then free up that 10 acres, so I then can develop whatever project that I was contemplating.
Okay. Yes, Planning Commissioner, go ahead.
Virtual.
Oh, Alicia.
Thank you.
There we go.
Good morning, everyone. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I'd like to echo, collaboration on this piece and the excitement around potentially finding a solution that works for a lot of different perspectives and folks in the county. A couple of pieces I would note is that the concept of no net loss was very much a part of the conversation going into the Planning Commission's vote to move forward with the TDR program recommendation. And that informed a lot of the subsequent votes on the specific site request for de-designation, which I think we were kind of viewing as, here's a potential candidate for a site if there's a TDR program in place, and the yes votes are contingent on that TDR program being in place. And so I just wanted to make that clear, and I think it's in the transcript in the record. But I didn't see in reviewing the most updated version of the interlocal agreement draft that no net loss. I think that concept could be much more express, maybe in the purpose section. That it's not just about de-designating, agricultural lands that might not be well suited for commercial purposes for agriculture, but it's about no net loss and looking for potential redesignation or other alternatives as well. Kind of getting to that mitigation concept. I also have pretty significant concerns with, I think it's supposed to be under section 5 of the interlocal agreement, under that was referenced, subsection C, that in the event the county hasn't fulfilled the obligations of basically preparing this TDR program, then the cities can just proceed with annexation of the receiving areas without compliance with a TDR. And I just think that I guess I can sort of understand why it's been put in there, but I really think that's contrary to the spirit and intent of the Planning Commission's recommendation and vote, which was that the de-designations or the annexation of additional properties into the UGA was premised on there being a TDR program, and that the expectation is there wouldn't be such annexations absent a functional TDR program. And so I would be concerned with leaving that language in there as written. A couple of other pieces. Just let me look at my notes here because I know some of this has already been discussed. But putting in more specific terms in the interlocal agreement about the de-designation of lands, that there would need to be, a redesignation or identification of other lands of suitable or greater size, but also suitable or greater, soil quality, like the land quality itself. And I think I raised some of those issues in the record when we were having our deliberations, as well as the Planning Commission. And also, I think, as has already been talked about today, the idea of looking at a market-based valuation rather than just simply assessed value. So those are, or a credit per acre kind of pricing aspect of it. So those are just a couple of pieces that are maybe a little bit more concrete from what I've been hearing about today's session that I wanted to flag.
Great, thank you for that. And what we're hearing is individual planning commissioners' perspectives, because that was a question I had. It didn't seem like all of the planning commissioners agreed with that no net loss, or thought that inevitably there would be a net loss. So it just doesn't seem like there was consensus on that. We have about 10.
I did want to address, yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Because that was specifically addressed, and my recollection was we changed the motion so it didn't include no net loss, because that was a concern. So, but we can review the record there. But there were some issues there. But again, we're all speaking from our personal, understanding and what we wanted, what we believe. So.
Great. We have about, I want to switch to that Ag Commission in about 8 minutes, I think. So Ron, would you like to add some thoughts?
All right. So the motion, specifically as it was amended, any ag land considered for UGA inclusion would be subject to an urban holding overlay and interlocal agreements that allowed a time certain and equitable TDR program to be developed by the stakeholders and led by the county, resulting in an equitable solution to ag land de-designation and designation in the county. So it didn't turn out to be no net loss. Specifically, it talked about the ability to both de-designate and designate. What's not spoken in that motion, but implied and necessary, my thoughts, is the interlocal agreement would explicitly state that no annexation of said ag land could take place without a functioning TDR program administered by Clark County. which I believe kind of echoes what Alicia had said. So that was our intent, as I remember the discussion and what Alicia said. The vote was 5-2. So there was general consensus on the wording of the motion for sure. And I believe we had good dialogue, but we did pull out the specifics of saying no net loss, but we added the ability to designate as part of the program. So
And then it would be fully functional TDR program
Fully
before there was any
functional.
annexation.
Yeah. So I think kind of building on what Jack was alluding to before, I think the aspect of bringing any land into any urban growth area is where the pay to play is that parcel of land gets a certain value of development rights associated with it specifically. So we're not talking about the idea of density bonuses anymore. We're talking about the idea of just the inclusion for raw material, the ability to develop.
Okay.
Thank you. So it wouldn't be tied to de-designation. It wouldn't be tied to bringing into the urban growth boundary. It would be tied to the time of annexation, the associated TDR transaction. That's the intent. What you're saying.
Can you say that again in a different way?
That the TDR that the condition that there is a future TDR program set up and a transaction associated with those acres that are de-designated in a separate process, if there are any acres, that the timing, the condition on a TDR credit would be at the time of annexation by the city. That would be the agreement that I believe the ILAs are suggesting in their agreement.
At the time of annexation, the check should already have cleared.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Go ahead.
I was just going to just double check, and I think I understand you correctly, but the motion was essentially reiterating what was just said, that the land not be developed, period, until a PDR program is in place.
Right. And the transactions have taken place from both the sending and receiving areas to know that you're getting that bank.
Okay. Thank you.
So I do really need to make sure just everybody clearly understands that what we're really talking about here is the ability to start to build some trust between communities that don't have trust. And the county is not passive in this. The county has to be the one that puts the trust together through the interlocal agreement and the execution of the TDR program. So this isn't a passive thing where we're going to just hope that the stakeholders jump on it and figure it out. The county is crucial towards the aspect of trust on both sides of this agreement.
When would you envision any ag land would be de-designated?
The ag land has to be de-designated in order to be brought into the urban growth boundary, is my understanding. And then that's why, and this we're having this conversation of like, how does, cart before the horse kind of thing. And then that's where the urban hold or the overlay holds it in basically ag status until the TDR program is developed. And then it then cannot be annexed until the credits are, after development, credits are purchased. Now said developer can then develop that land, but it still has to be then annexed by the city. So it's a chain of events. And that's kind of what, that needle that we were trying to thread, I think, as far as preservation of agricultural land and compliance with state law. So
it's that compliance with state law that is at issue, and the de-designation of ag land is separate from is a separate decision from the TDRs, as we've heard from various folks.
it's an interlocal agreement that puts the overlay on it. So it has the same effect.
Sure. I think I could clarify on. I think you misspoke when you said in ag status. I think you meant just an urban holding, that it cannot be developed. Not that it's state. Once it's designated, it's not ag land anymore. Could be used for that purpose, but it's not designated anymore.
And therein lies the hurdle.
And therein lies the ability to build trust or not.
Chair.
Well, there's other parties outside of this room that will be making those ultimate decisions on whether or not we're compliant with the GMA.
Chair.
Yes, go
I
ahead.
want to give time for our egg experts, but just before that, do you have any comments about the battleground proposal? I don't know if we'll have you before us in any other time. I just wanted if you could give a little bit more explanation on the battleground decision.
What part of the decision?
Dollars Corner and the swap. There, a position that you took opposite of what the city requested.
Oh, about not
Living in Meadowglade.
Yeah, it's a pretty urban development. This was part of my motion, and I felt like they were skipping out on their city responsibility to get rid of a piece that they didn't like and grab something that they did like. It wasn't deep.
It wasn't deep.
My
okay.
Yeah, my concern was similar. I didn't like losing residential land or potential development land for what they were indicating as more commercial land and creating some housing pressure stuff. I would have been more aligned if we were then looking at some of their site specific requests that maybe have been more appropriate for development. But I'll agree with my fellow commissioner there that it wasn't this hugely deep thing, and I think it could have gone either way from that standpoint. But it was really more of a housing issue.
Thanks. Well, stick around. Thank you very much. I know you all have spent a good deal of time with all of this comp plan update, and we're not done yet. But let's switch over to the Ag Commission.
Thank you. Mo McKenna, co-chair of the Ag Commission.
Isaiah Irish, member of the Ag Commission.
First, thank you for having us here. This is the first comprehensive plan update where we have had farmers at the table advising on what should happen with farmland. Yay, that's very exciting. And I just want to mention that I had the opportunity to attend all the Planning Commission meetings. I've been watching this conversation really closely, and I feel very hopeful that we are actually all on the same side of the table. I don't know, like hearing Commissioner Haroon talk about the value of protecting farmland as during this process, hearing the cities talk about that, it just gives me a lot of hope. And I think what I'm speaking to today and what Isaiah will also be speaking to is the order of operations, and really talking about the Ag Commission has had long conversations about this topic, and we are strong proponents of a transfer of development right program. This came up as part of the Ag study out before this even came up from the city of Ridgefield. We believe that there should be a program in place in Clark County. We keep talking about TDR programs, but that's actually only one method that counties use to protect ag land and also allow for development. So we mentioned in our comments to y'all that we wanted to explore not only TDR programs, but make progress on purchase of development rights and mitigation programs. And counties are using these various programs in different ways to incentivize conservation, incentivize economic development for farming in their communities. And I think we've gotten kind of myopic in our conversations on TDRs, and we hope to broaden the scope of what's possible and add to the complexity. Why not? I have to call out that something that has come up again and again in the commission meetings is that we keep talking about ag land as this static thing that is crushing development or growth in the county. And I just want to make it very clear that ag land is land for jobs. Ag is an industry that employs people, that adds to our tax base, that feeds people. And I think that sometimes we miss that in these conversations, right? And so when it comes to locking up ag land for a certain period of time until it is developed into this higher or best use, you do lock out market opportunity for farmers and wineries and equestrian facilities to be using that land as part of this agricultural industry that we're part of, right? And so the conversations that we really had as a commission were about NODI designation during this comprehensive plan update so that we can make sure that the market opportunity exists for farmers to be using that farmland and have access to it. And we might find that there is actually a really great agricultural use for that land that's right here today, right? It doesn't have to be locked up for hoping that there's some other better use for it. The other key components that came out of the recommendations from the Ag Commission are the ag land study identified 60,000 plus acres in Clark County that are sitting in a rural designation that is not Ag 20 that could be potentially fantastic sending areas. But a lot more evaluation needs to be done about that land. And one of the key recommendations was to place a moratorium on upzoning of that land while we get through this process. The spirit of that is understanding that without a moratorium, we might lose out on those key sending areas to a future program. We might increase the speculation that is happening in those areas, and we might actually do long-term damage to a successful TDR program if we don't really think about those sending areas as being reserves, right, that we're trying to build something in. We've also talked a lot about this idea of creating agricultural districts, right? Thinking about how do we put districts back together. And I will just call out that the Clark County and what came out of that ag study, there is a lot of challenge in our sending areas today. We're very fragmented. We have lots of 5, 10 acre parcels that are non-conforming to Ag 20. There is going to have to be a lot of work done on how we create conforming parcels and working with landowners. We have a water rights. Water is an issue in this county. That is an issue that is going to have to be dealt with. I will just say that the commission is excited to work on this problem, and we understand the complexity of finding similar quality land to what we might be giving up. I'll pause to see if there's any questions on those kind of first 2 points, and I'll go on.
Just a really quick question, Mo. Thank you so much. By the way, and I really appreciate you mentioning that, agricultural land is not static,
right?
That the jobs are created, right? And most of us like to eat. And so we have access to fresh food. I just want a point of clarification. You said that the Ag Commission is recommending no de-designation until the comp plan is completed.
We are recommending that no de-designation take place until a TDR is in place.
Until TDR
program is in place first.
Perfect.
The commission members feel pretty strongly that let's create the program first. Let's make sure that it is going to drive the outcome that we hope for. Many commission members shared concern that a program could actually exacerbate speculation issues in the county if not created very carefully. And our commission members have been researching PDR, TDR programs, what's working, what's not. We're talking to other commissions, right? We keep using this example of Seattle as but we are not Seattle, right? And Seattle's program, actually, the city of Seattle has incredible density. It has, 6 million, 7 million people, right? And they're working with other counties that are actually sending areas, right? Versus, Whatcom County might be a closer example of what we might look at. They have a TDR program and it's not used. And it's not used for many of the same reasons that we might have an issue here in getting adoption, right? They actually have quite a bit of capacity in their urban areas. And that's something that we really heard a lot about, is that there's questions about how much capacity we need to grow our urban growth boundaries here. There's lots of different calculations, and Alternative 2 had a lot of additional capacity. So I think, that for now, what the commission has landed on is no de-designation. Let's build a program that actually works for all, including farmers and including developers, before we rush this through.
Thank you. And then just a really quick question, and I appreciate that this is probably the first time in my year and a half on this council that both sides are in agreement on something, TDRs. My question, an agricultural district, and I might have missed it as I was sitting here taking notes, but can you just elaborate a little bit more about what the recommendation is for agricultural districts?
Yeah. So we've had lots of kind of conversation around this as a commission, but one of the challenges in Clark County is that we've been so fragmented in the way that we've developed that it causes lots and lots of issues for farmers. Farmers might be moving equipment a long distance. We have a couple of farmers on the commission that operate really big machinery, and they have a really hard time getting through roundabouts and around curb cuts, right? And so if we can, and this can happen through a TDR process, is that we're determining the areas of the county where the soils are really high quality, where farming already exists and there's lots of farms in that area, where there's maybe proximity to things that farmers need, like cold storage and all of the tractor repair. And you could think about creating these districts, and a TDR program would allow us to say, these are the sending areas that we want to incentivize, right? That farms exist there, and we're trying to pull them back together to create this vibrant agricultural communities in these areas, right? So I think that takes work, right? Of understanding, where do we already have these farms are there, the soils are there, there's soils that have access to water, all of these things that make a farm really work. And the commission is excited to work on that problem.
Thank you, Mo.
Yeah.
Okay, another question, and then we want Isaiah to be able to say a few words too.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, even though I've read your recommendations, amazing when you have these kinds of meetings, how certain things you'll connect with that you didn't notice before. And this would be a question that I think staff will need to provide some information on. What I'm trying to understand is, with your recommendation for the moratorium on land that was identified in the ag study as potentially could be considered for designation, I would like to understand the extent of that land that was identified that is being currently looked at for upzoning. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. I think it's tricky. This conversation about TDR and de-designation, and they literally are completely separate. So whether a TDR program is in place or whether we should wait for one, either the land should be designated or de-designated. Those are two separate issues. But one thing, and then just real quickly, one thing I'd love to, I don't know if it's within a county's purview or not, but when you talk about parcelizing and whether a first right of refusal for an adjacent property owner could be implemented, something like that. But I want to thank you for your work, and I really, really am looking forward to all of the recommendations that are coming out of this group to see what we can do to help the ag community. So that's all my questions at this point.
Okay, we're coming up on
I'll be
noon.
brief.
Well, I just want to, if it's okay with folks, if we spill over a little bit past noon, but maybe not past 12:15. Okay.
Sure. I
Go
just have
ahead.
a few brief comments. I think Mo did a great job really representing the Ag Commission, but with the viewing of the King County TDR examples as well as the meetings today, I agree with Councilor Young that it's an absolutely separate decision from de-designation of land. And at least with the King County example, a TDR would have more to do with the increased residential zoning of all the develop areas kind of in the midst of development in Ridgefield, and has the TDR has less to do with the theoretical properties that may be de-designated. And so I just think the two ideas have been conflated, and just taking a moment to try to think about the issues separately, and our support for TDR to preserve land. And I appreciated the examples from King County, how they were in their maybe flagship example, were able to add 100+ units on a existing apartment block while preserving potentially timberland, and how you could preserve land without taking other land. It wasn't like we have 2 spaces of ag land and we'll promise, to preserve one if we can take the other. It was more of a, let's increase the density on already residential land while preserving land. And I just kind of wonder what that process would look like if it is true that Vancouver doesn't have a resistance to kind of a top level of density, and how that we would generate a market for the TDR with the kind of free expansion of, or in my view, the expansion of density goals. And so I just kind of feel like the ag land is kind of being the target of this conversation when it's not the areas that are residential already that are increasing density with a plan 2.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for all this. I think this is a great opportunity to preserve farmland right now. My question, or my concern about waiting until after, is that you can have these parallel processes, and I think we've heard over and over here that nobody here is considering have de-designation directly tied to the TDRs, to have it a separate decision, full stop, and that at some point there'd be a decision to create a TDR program. If you wait until after, you would lose out on those acres if acres are decided to be de-designated separately, independently through the comp plan. Then if you don't start the process for TDRs, then you would essentially lose the potential protection value of those acres that were de-designated. That is why we're having the conversation at the same time, and it sounds like they're being tied. They are separate processes. I think that is the intent of everyone here. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the ag districts, or the sending areas. Have you had discussions about what that would look like geographically in Clark County, whether you encourage doing it by watershed or proximity to where the development is occurring, just what it would look like?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question, and I want to go back to your previous point. Clark Conservation District has done a ton of work on this very topic. I think they are the experts in the county on the concept of ag districts. And so that would be the starting point. The Ag Commission has also, and this was in our initial recommendation out from the Ag Land Study to y'all, the Ag Commission has also outlined what criteria we think would be good to look at in terms of sending areas and how we identify these districts. So we wanted to look at, certainly soils and where there's already a lot of farming taking place and where there's water, also where there's landowners who want to participate, right? It's always good to get people that want to be part of a program, and in those sending areas. I think we have also discussed that and we've talked with other counties that have really benefited from having a staff member actually working on this problem, right? So similar to a legacy lands type situation where it's somebody actually going out working with farmers and getting them ready to be one of those sending areas. That feels really critical. To your prior point, Councillor Little, I do think that the way that King County would approach this problem in other counties as well, of like, we're going to de-designate here, is through mitigation, right? Not through a TDR. They would instead be doing something where it was a 4-to-1 or a 3-to-1 program. Let me find the name of it. The Washington State Food Policy Forum was convened by the legislature in October 2023. And actually one of their recommendations was around a statewide policy for mitigation for lost farmland. And they recommended a 3-to-1. That actually made it into a state bill in this short session, State Bill 6104. It didn't make it out of committee in this short session, but I do think that there's state work happening around this very topic. And so as we think about the question of de-designation specifically, other counties are addressing this, and there is even a statewide push to figure this problem out.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like there's lots of different strategies that maybe could occur at the same time
Absolutely.
to protect farmland. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you for underscoring the importance of the sending areas, because I think identifying priority sending areas really is what we're trying to accomplish in protecting those lands. And I would just note that the county already has a conservation easement program for ag land. It's been slow to, I think we may be on the verge of having one after, I think it was the end of our last comp plan update. So the mechanics are there, and the Conservation District has done a lot of work in this area. But another question.
Yes, no, not a question, just a comment, because the Ag Advisory Commission is fairly new, and I know we threw a ton of work on you to start off with, but just a general reminder, and it's the same from all of our boards and commissions, is that we do lobby the state. And so issues that become important, you can make a recommendation to the council that we lobby for that. So just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that opportunity.
Okay, any last comments from you folks? Go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's really important to kind of understand this point that we're at right now. When the Planning Commission made the vote, it was really in the concept that that is an if and only if the ILA and the TDRs went together, that we would see the land converted from its overlay into a developed area. It's what brings both sides to the table. Recognizing that to go inside, there has to be de-designation. That is the risk. The other risk is that perhaps alternative one is the right choice this time, but how long can that hold up with what the state is pushing in the concept of densities and requirements for affordable housing? We're going to be facing this aspect of adjacent property next to urban growth areas repeatedly. If we miss this opportunity to gel and come together with goals that make sense going forward, then we're going to be talking about this over and over again, but never accomplishing it. And this is the part where we have to get to the place that says there's risk on both sides. There's loss, but the loss can be mitigated if that's in the design of the program. So to me, this is just like, it's one of the reasons I came back to be a planning commissioner. Was I so tired of this cycle of lawsuits and everybody getting nothing what they really want out of the deal, but nobody's satisfied when it's all done. The best we can hope for is to take this situation where it's scarcity. Scarcity also becomes a capacity restraint, which becomes a market opportunity, which gives both sides an opportunity to get something.
Sure.
Thanks. A very nice summary. Go ahead.
Thank you for that. And just to clarify, you said perhaps alternative one is the way to go. I assume you're speaking in the hypothetical because the vote was 7-0 in the Planning Commission against alternative one.
You make the final decision. We are just a recommendation.
But that was the recommendation.
Yeah.
7-0.
The council, I don't know, when has the council ever agreed with the planning commission when it comes to the comp plan update? I'm not sure. I just have a few closing comments just to indicate where we're at right now. The comp plan, actually, it was referred to as the 2025 comp plan. Now we're calling it the 2026 comp plan because it was due December 31st, 2025. There's currently an appeal to the Growth Management Hearing Board. There could be a determination that the county is non-compliant with GMA before we even get to the point of selecting our preferred alternative for this comp plan. So I think this the difficulty, and we don't have a timeline. We currently don't have a timeline for when we will complete the comp plan, hopefully before the end of the year. But we need to be making our decisions, however difficult they are. All of this information that you all provided, we're grateful for it, and it will inform the decisions that we make. It would be good to lock in a commitment to TDRs, but at the same time, I worry about being compliant with GMA, and because, you know, we could make whatever decision, and that is what has occurred in the past, and then it could be 2 to 7 years of wrangling with litigation before things get settled. So I agree with you. We want to avoid that to the extent we possibly can, and that trust does need to be developed. I think it's very important that we've had the Ag Commission here and the Planning Commission and the cities. And there's cities, I think, that may have some opinions about this that haven't been here today. So with that, I guess I'll look to the county manager. Is there something else we can do to help move this along?
Yeah, so the only question I would have for council is, are you ready to have a public hearing on the selection of the alternative? Just so, because that is probably 3 to 4 weeks out based on our requirements, and we haven't scheduled that hearing.
Right, and we need to do that before the final EIS can be completed, and we haven't even looked at the infrastructure needs, so there's still a lot of work to do. I would say I'm ready because I think we just really need to move this along. It'll be a long meeting. We'll hear a lot again from the public, and there'll be a lot of discussion on the dais here, but we need to pin down what we want. We need to get a majority to move something forward.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes, I agree that we should move forward as quickly as possible, given that we have that other work session on zooming in on each parcel and have a description of each one so that we have a full understanding. The previous request for a work session that we could potentially have next week.
And I want to clarify on that. It is only the parcels that are being discussed from the cities, not all of the 100 site-specific requests.
Yes.
And is it the 3 cities that we heard from today, or all of the cities?
Today was just the 3 cities per council's rec.
As far as your zoom in?
Including Battleground. Yeah, the cities.
Battleground.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll re-forward all of the site-specific requests are online, and I'll re-forward them to council as well, so you can educate yourselves or remind yourselves before we
Okay, but
have
it
that
would be
discussion.
just limited to those ones that the cities have requested. Okay, and you'll send us the link so we can do our independent research as well. And would we be able to have that work session next week?
We do have a Board of Health meeting, but we don't have another work session request, and I assume that staff would be available next Wednesday. It's just to do the Google map and click on the seat. Yes, they will be.
Okay. That sounds good. So I think we could move our schedule ahead and schedule that for our decision on the public hearing on the preferred
I only
alternative?
heard two on the public hearing. I need a third
Public
one.
hearing. So how does anyone else feel? Is there something you need before we can have a public hearing on our preferred alternative?
Let's do it.
The only thing is just reiterating that work session, looking at this parcel specifically and also looking at the evaluation criteria for agricultural land as part of that. That as long as we're able to have that work session prior, then
Well, we already received a briefing on the ag study. So is there something you want in addition to that?
Yeah,
And
that
did we
was-
have two counselors
that was part
wanted
of.
to look at, was it part of it?
We'd already agreed to that, yes. That was part of the work session request, was to be able to look at the criterion for the parcels that are currently designated ag.
Which parcels are you referring to?
The parcels that are being requested by the city.
Okay. Limited to those.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, so so then I think we can move ahead with scheduling public hearing for our decision. So again, thank you, everyone. You can still communicate with us and participate in the public hearing as well. We welcome that. Okay, and with that, I think we've concluded our work sessions this morning. Almost on time. Thank you.